Hini saw Oiza approaching her slowly and instinctively wanted to bow. Of course, she knew who Oiza was. The second prince of the empire. At Victor's lecture, countless nobles were present. And those two princes sat right in the center of the lecture hall, drawing a lot of attention. Your Highness. The second prince smiled at Hini, and before she could bow, he spoke first. Stop. Hini froze for 2 seconds upon hearing the prince's words, her body half bent, awkwardly pausing in midair. No need to bow. No one knows I'm here, the second prince said with a smile. I just wanted to come and see this memorable place. Hini slowly straightened up, her hands tightly clenched together, forcing a stiff smile. A prince was such a noble person, it was something unimaginable for someone like her to be spoken to by him. But Hini only wanted to leave at this moment. Apart from Professor Victor, she instinctively didn't want to interact with any male. But since the prince hadn't given her permission to leave, Hini naturally didn't dare to leave on her own. She simply stood silently to the side. Suddenly, the prince asked her a question. I heard you mention demons earlier. How much do you know about demons? Listening to the prince's words, Hini lowered her head, responding weakly. I haven't learned much. I see. The prince watched Hini, squinting slightly. He could feel it. Yes, he could feel it very clearly. Inside this girl, there was a demon. That extremely furious aura was clearly emanating from the girl in front of him. The prince knew that upon meeting Hini, he had confirmed his suspicions. He certainly knew who Hini was. Victor's former assistant, with countless connections to Victor. And the fury that should have appeared on Jace was originally a grand gift he had prepared for his royal brother. Why, inexplicably, did it appear on her? Greed. Do you have any idea? That sticky, hoarse voice gradually echoed in his heart. Never seen this little girl. Not familiar. Telling lies came effortlessly to demons. The prince didn't take it seriously. After all, when he first met Greed was attached to that poor pighead, Devin Razor. At this moment, the prince chuckled softly. He was very interested in Hini before him. Victor must know something, so he used the girl in front of him to forcibly take away the wrath demon. If he could discover her secret of attracting demons, as he thought, he reached out a hand to Hini and continued. Perhaps we could find a place to talk, shall we? An invitation from a prince ordinary people would not refuse. The prince also believed Hini would make the right choice. But what he didn't expect was the girl in front of him bowed deeply to him and then said something that shocked him. I'm very sorry, Your Highness. I cannot leave with you. As the words fell, the prince was stunned. Even the hand he had extended was frozen in place, forgotten to be withdrawn. He had been refused? As a prince of the empire, it was the first time he had been rejected by a woman. The prince found it hard to understand, looking at Hini with a forced smile. I say, may I ask why? Hini took a few steps back because she sensed an inexplicable malice from the prince. It was as if a sharp emotion was gradually brewing in his heart. Hini was very sensitive to emotions, and she hurriedly bowed again, apologizing. Sorry, Your Highness, because I really have something important to do. Hearing this, the prince frowned slightly. What could be so important that you would refuse a prince? Could it be just because of Victor? The prince looked at Hini, taking a few steps back. He pressed on. Inside Hini's body, a red crocodile slowly raised its head, frowning. The rich scent of jealousy, tastes awful. Hini kept retreating, while the prince kept advancing. The prince became somewhat impatient. He had to figure it out. Why was there a demon hidden inside this woman in front of him? But suddenly, he saw someone standing beside Hini. A threat to the protected target detected. A initiating protective measure. In the blink of an eye, the prince only felt a flash before his eyes. Boom! A massive impact hit his chest, the powerful pressure even breaking a few of his ribs. The next second, he flew out like a meteor, limbs spread wide. Unprepared, he fell into the deep lake, splashing beautiful sprays of water. Hini widened her eyes, watching Sapphirose forming a bow stance with one leg, the other stretched straight, her arm suspended in the air. The whole person was stunned in place. Threat eliminated. A voice sounded from beneath the cloak. Hini was dumbfounded, covering her face with one hand, as if she couldn't believe what she had just seen. The prince had been beaten. It's over. Now, trouble is brewing. The huge mountain range protruded with bizarre rock formations, a hint of green draping a thin layer of clothing on the mountain. This was the back mountain outside the capital, vast in scope, requiring a long journey to reach the summit. Kevlar teased Victor on the side. Hey, doesn't it feel exciting? What? Victor asked casually. Kevlar smiled sweetly. Of course, it's a date with your sister. Don't you find it thrilling? Little Gwen knows about this, you know. She extended a finger, poking Victor's chest, hooking the pendant on his chest. You have to spend the whole day with your sister. Victor, hands in pockets, looked down at Kevlar's charming eyes, his gaze moving downward, sneering disdainfully. I'm not desperate enough to settle for this. Old hag? Kevlar was caught off guard. Though she didn't quite understand Victor's strange look, the last comment about being old was enough to break her defense. The bloodline of the demon hunter extended her lifespan, even her appearance barely changed. But her age was always a secret not to be mentioned. Kevlar's face twitched slightly, forcing a smile. Victor, you haven't changed since you were a child, still just as unlikable. Victor glanced at her, his gaze returning forward. But I have a fiancé. Copyright. Kevlar silently withdrew her hand, walking forward without a word. The world finally quieted down, and Victor continued to follow behind Kevlar. Soon, they stood before a cave. Deep within the cave was an extremely large stone door. It seemed the height of the mountain was naturally formed to accommodate this massive stone door. Kevlar stopped and entered the cave, looking up at the stone door. We're here. She placed her hand on the stone door, pressing down heavily. The massive stone door began to tremble, dust falling from the cracks. The two doors gradually opened, a gust of wind blowing fiercely from the dark tunnel. Bang! The door gradually stopped, standing on both sides of the cave. Kevlar stepped forward, walking into it. Victor followed behind her slowly. The dark tunnel was filled with a damp and moldy smell. Enduring the odor, Victor continued walking forward. But soon, the tunnel suddenly widened. The surrounding lights instantly lit up, the rock walls polished smooth, the space so vast it felt like it protruded from the mountain. The rock walls were covered with various ordinary images, each annotated with notes. The surrounding rocks were polished into flat shapes, looking like they could be used for sitting and resting. The entire vast space seemed like some kind of cult base, used for speeches and gathering followers. Kevlar slowly turned around and said to Victor, "This is the Demon Hunter branch near the capital. Since it's newly established, it's somewhat simple. I'm currently in charge here, serving as the branch's minister." As her words fell, Kevlar's aura suddenly surged. A bar rose, and Victor sensitively noticed that Kevlar saw her health bar and her level. LV40. Kevlar had leveled up. Previously, she was level 39. In the game, there are two occasions when health bars and levels appear. One is physical contact, and the other is entering combat mode. He hadn't touched Kevlar, so the Kevlar in front of him had already entered combat readiness. At this time, several figures slowly emerged from the darkness of the rock walls. They were draped in the emblem of demon hunters, wearing various animal masks. Beneath the masks, only a pair of eyes stared intently at the man in front of them. Victor, hands in pockets, showed little change in expression, as if everything was within his expectations. "So, you brought me here to test whether I have any dealings with demons, right?" Kevlar frowned, looking at Victor with a conflicted gaze. "I really want to believe you, Victor." So, she gave him that pendant, a token as precious as her life. "I know I can't defeat you. If I die, that pendant will expel the demon within you. The power of the demon hunter will protect you, never again corrupted by demons. The blood of demon hunters is at odds with demons, so the power of demon hunters will forcibly cleanse the demon's power. I won't allow a demon to come into contact with Gwen. Consider it for Gwen, Victor." Kevlar slowly drew a silver-white dagger from her waist, and the surrounding demon hunters simultaneously drew the same style of silver blades. "All right. Since it's a test, I have no problem." Victor suddenly laughed, squinting his eyes. "But, to make the test less boring, from now on, I won't use any magic. Victor took his left hand out of his coat pocket, a white wind blade forming a sword, attaching to his forearm. A turbulent wind swirled in the space, the papers on the walls torn down, dancing in the air. And Victor's coat was also blown, flapping loudly. He held the sword in one hand, speaking lightly, "For your trust in me, try to defeat me." Demon hunters are inherently adept at countering mages. As a niche choice within the assassin branch, demon hunters primarily target demons with high health and defense. To combat demons, their attacks naturally carry an additional armor-piercing attribute. Moreover, fighting against mages grants demon hunters an extra 10% damage bonus. Therefore, for an average mage, engaging with a demon hunter is far from wise. However, several demon hunters gripped their silver blades tightly, and with a light step, a gust of wind arose, making their figures disappear completely. Those red silhouettes crouched on the surrounding stone walls, their eyes under the masks fixed intently on Victor. The silver blades in their hands began to spin, slicing through the air, creating fissures all around Victor. It was like countless cages without restraints, unfolding around him. Two red cloaks turned into after images, passing through the air chains, squeezing into the narrow space, and crawling towards Victor. One of them swung a kick aimed at Victor's ankle. The other, in coordination, leapt high, brandishing a cold gleaming blade towards Victor's head. Yet Victor remained unperturbed. As the cold gleam neared his face, he waved his left hand, and the wind blade on his forearm effortlessly split the incoming silver blade in two. The sweeping kick from below seemed excruciatingly slow to Victor. His pupils slightly contracted as the leg appeared beneath him. Victor swiftly lifted his leg and stomped down hard. A hard sensation met his foot, followed by a light exertion, and the sound of shattering reached his ears. With a twist of his heel, the unfortunate demon hunter's foot was flipped over. A piercing, wretched scream instantly filled the cave, echoing continuously. Kevlar felt her heart skip a beat at the sound. A demon hunter suspended in midair watched his silver blade being split in two, his heart sinking. But when he looked forward again, a shadow rushed towards his face. Bang! The intense impact transmitted through his twisted muscles, his whole body slamming into the rock wall, his jaw losing all sensation and hanging limply. Of course, these injuries, for demon hunters with excellent recovery speed, were merely superficial wounds. In no time, they would recover. However, the instant downfall of two demon hunters made the others leaning against the rock wall swallow nervously. Their silver blades seemed to tremble, their expressions turning extremely grave. Simultaneously, the air that had been torn apart gradually returned to calm. Is Victor Cravino really a mage? I've never seen such a troublesome mage. Have you ever seen a mage who fights in close combat? Victor's gaze slowly fell upon them. Above the demon hunters perched on the rock wall, their respective levels gradually appeared. All above level 30, third-tier demon hunters. To find out if he was possessed by a demon, Kevlar truly went to great lengths. Demon hunters are rare to begin with, and finding a few third-tier demon hunters within the capital is already difficult. And now, to test him, she actually brought so many people. Victor's gaze fell on the two demon hunters who were no longer able to fight. What a pity. Better to show some mercy. The remaining demon hunters exchanged glances, swinging several meteor hammers from their waists. The massive impact pierced the space, and even Victor caught a whiff of danger. He turned his body, stepping on the demon hunter beneath him who was howling in pain, retreating backward. The rapidly advancing meteor hammers slammed into the surroundings, sending a shower of sand and stones. The demon hunter beneath his feet was also kicked up by him, swiftly thrown into the distance. Such a nuisance. Victor's gaze fixed ahead, his mind exceptionally clear. In the next second, perhaps those demon hunters would emerge from the dust. As if confirming his thoughts, several demon hunters swung their meteor hammers, leaning forward, breaking through the dust, and charging at Victor. Seeing those demon hunters behaving like brutes, Victor merely chuckled softly. Wind began to swirl around him, and the sand and stones gradually froze in time. Everything around him seemingly slowed down, or perhaps it was Victor's movements that became too fast. In the blink of an eye, The black windbreaker swiftly passed through several demon hunters, the wind blade in his hand slowly slicing through the air. Whoosh! The high-speed wind swept up, the sand constantly striking the rock wall. The demon hunters were stunned. Their target had vanished before their eyes. Behind us, a demon hunter cried out in shock, and everyone turned to see Victor standing behind them. His windbreaker fluttering continuously. Victor flicked his forearm, countless wind marks exploding in an instant. In a flash, the marks that had been grazing their clothes seemed to activate. With the wind marks, their cloaks were completely torn to shreds. Even the black chain mail beneath the cloaks was entirely severed. Yet, despite this, not a single wound was left on their bodies. At this moment, they stood dumbfounded. What was that speed just now? Could it be magic? In the blink of an eye, the wind blade on Victor's forearm dissipated into invisible wind currents. He slowly turned back, his gaze on the demon hunters with their tattered clothing, his voice calmly resonating. Have you not realized the gap between us yet? Of course, he hadn't used magic. Everything he did was merely the passive enhancement of the wind calamity. Just like Gul'dan's damage boost and Drua's stamina and recovery enhancement. The wind calamity are corresponding to extreme speed. This speed may not be significantly noticeable for a mage, but if placed on any melee unit, speed is unbeatable. Victor had wanted to experience the new power the wind calamity granted him, which is why he agreed to play this little trial with Kevlar. Seeing Victor's composed demeanor, effortlessly handling dozens of demon hunters, they couldn't help but take a few steps back. Their armor was rendered useless, and the tower of confidence in their hearts naturally crumbled. After all, the man before them was clearly a mage. Yet he crushed them effortlessly with mere close combat and speed they couldn't comprehend. Moreover, they truly couldn't tell if Victor was a demon. Demon hunters and demons are like water and fire, and when facing demons, their instincts make it hard to remain rational. Thus, when fighting demons, demon hunters inadvertently fall into a berserk state. Therefore, confirming whether someone is possessed by a demon is simple for demon hunters. The power of a demon cannot be hidden once in battle, it will inevitably be sensed by demon hunters. However, during the fight with Victor, they felt none of that. In conclusion, even if they wanted to fight, they lacked the motivation. Because demon hunters won't attack anyone other than demons. So, they simply gave up. No more, no more. Fighting is one thing, but tearing clothes? Lord Kevlar, be honest, he's not a demon, is he? Kevlar stood aside, clutching two silver daggers tightly. Earlier, she hadn't stepped forward, wanting to observe Victor's battle in advance. Kevlar knew Victor would win, but she didn't expect him to win so easily. He was supposed to be a mage. Kevlar shook her head, dismissing further thoughts. She raised one arm, the dagger aimed straight at Victor. Now, it's my turn. With those words, Kevlar's back foot pressed against the ground. In almost an instant, her legs, like a cheetah, suddenly exerted force. Taut muscles released all their power in a moment. Like an arrow from a bowstring, she charged at Victor with astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, the silver gleam had already streaked through the air. However, in Victor's eyes, Kevlar's movements seemed only slightly swift. He slightly sidestepped, and the two gleams passed by him, not even grazing his cheek. Kevlar's steps halted abruptly, immediately changing direction, the cold gleam once again stabbing towards Victor's waist. Victor, with his hands in his pockets, moved gracefully like the wind, the pale white glow flickering incessantly on his windbreaker. It was as if an invisible force controlled Victor, allowing him to swiftly maneuver and evade Kevlar's attacks. His speed was astonishing, like a breathtaking storm. The demon hunters, whose armor was already completely broken, stood there in awe, watching Kevlar's fierce assault, exclaiming in admiration. As expected of Lord Kevlar. What incredible speed! Is this a fourth-tier demon hunter? To think she can fight that monster for so long? Though in their eyes, Victor remained the more terrifying one. Kevlar moved like lightning, leaping lightly, her two daggers in hand flying towards Victor like bolts of lightning. Victor sidestepped and deftly avoided the attack. Surprisingly, the two silver blades suddenly reversed in midair. Kevlar seized the moment, a gust rising at her feet, like a stream of light, She charged at Victor, but Victor merely leaned back, dodging the returning daggers, quickly straightening up, and grabbing Kevlar's wrist that appeared before him. Kevlar was momentarily stunned but somewhat delighted. A good opportunity. What she wanted most was to touch Victor's body, and now, he presented himself to her. Her other free hand grabbed the swiftly flying dagger, quickly stabbing towards Victor's chest. But at that moment, Victor's other hand also grabbed her other wrist. Kevlar was dumbfounded. This position left both of them without means of attack. Moreover, at this rate, she was about to fall into Victor's embrace. But soon, Victor demonstrated what wrestling was. He grasped Kevlar's wrists, turned around, and hoisted her body onto his back. Then, leaning forward, he exerted force with his arms. Boom! Kevlar's seemingly frail body suddenly crashed into the ground with such force that even the ground trembled. The other demon hunters couldn't help but avert their eyes, shrinking back, completely unwilling to look at Kevlar again. Miserable, truly too miserable. Cough. Cough. As the dust gradually settled, Kevlar lay on the ground, coughing lightly twice. The injuries weren't too severe, at least she could still move. It just felt a bit difficult to breathe. Kevlar glanced at Victor with a somewhat defiant look. Don't you know how to let a woman win? Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, expressionless, looking at her. I gave you a chance. Unfortunately, you didn't win. Kevlar wobbled as she struggled to get up from the ground and sat cross-legged. Victor's throat just now made her feel like her lungs had shifted a bit. She gently rubbed her chest, trying to alleviate the discomfort. Fortunately, demon hunters have strong recovery abilities. Kevlar propped herself up with her hands, leaning back slightly, showcasing her slender yet powerful figure. Ha ha! That was a good fight. Her voice carried a hint of wildness and satisfaction, as if the battle just now was a long-awaited enjoyment for her. Although Kevlar didn't use her full strength, she knew her brother-in-law also didn't use his full strength. Besides, their definitions of full strength were quite different. After all, Victor's primary role was that of a mage. At this moment, Victor suddenly bent down slowly and picked up her dagger. The silver-white dagger was tightly gripped in Victor's hand. Kevlar stared at him blankly, then watched as Victor took the dagger and cut a slit in his palm. Her eyes were fixed on him, not daring to miss a single detail. Driper. Bright red blood gradually dripped, pooling on the ground. Under the powerful recovery ability, the wound had already healed completely. Kevlar murmured, truly amazing recovery ability. Victor, it's such a waste for you to be a mage instead of a warrior. She was about to say Victor was wasting his talent, but on second thought, this guy was the youngest tier 4 mage. She stopped herself. One can only say, geniuses are like this, even though he is a mage. But his strength, no one would think he is just a mage. And Kevlar, along with the other demon hunters, understood what Victor was doing. Verification. The weapons of demon hunters are made from special materials. If Victor really had a demon inside him, cutting open his flesh would reveal it. Demon blood would be absorbed by the dagger, while a normal person's would not. This is also why the demon hunters went to great lengths to try to injure Victor. And Victor picked up the dagger and cut his own flesh to prove himself to her. There was no demon in him. This is a simple verification method. If Kevlar wanted, she could even use a weapon to scratch the second prince in the north to verify if he had a demon in him. But she couldn't. She couldn't use it on the second prince. At least, not in the north. Not on the Dillon family's territory. So she let Oiza return to the capital. I'm very glad I don't have to be your enemy, Victor, Kevlar said, looking at the black crystal pendant on Victor's chest. She squinted her eyes, revealing a curved and natural smile. Whether or not Victor was colluding with demons, Kevlar was prepared. If he really had a demon inside him, the pendant would take away his demonic power. If Kevlar had wrongly accused Victor, as it turned out, Victor had proven himself. Then, the pendant would be her compensation. After all, I've given you my life. Hearing this, Victor glanced at Kevlar. The recovery ability of demon hunters is incredibly strong, and in this short time, she had fully recovered. She stretched comfortably. After a fight with Victor, Kevlar felt refreshed. Even the two demon hunters who were brutally beaten by Victor had fully recovered by now. They stood behind Kevlar, ready, after taking a beating, Kevlar felt a bit itchy again, beckoning to Victor with her finger under his chin, smiling at him. Hey, Victor, don't go back later. Do you want to play some fun games with your sister tonight? Victor ignored her, just took out the pendant from his pocket. You demon hunters have an operation tonight, don't you? Kevlar was stunned. The words "how do you know" almost slipped out, but she managed to close her mouth. However, her attitude already amounted to an admission. Victor just held the pendant, speaking calmly. This thing of the demon hunters can detect if there's a demonic presence nearby. I know, when you asked Leah to pass it to me, you were already suspicious of me. The black crystal pendant shimmered under the surrounding candlelight. Kevlar looked at the pendant in Victor's hand, saying nothing. Why did Victor guess this? Because Victor's family really kept a primal demon. If nothing unexpected happens, Victor said, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Kevlar. You demon hunters have already started your operation, and the area around my home has already been marked by you. Hearing this, Kevlar's eyes flickered, seeming a bit complicated. Victor, if you wanted to give it to me, you could have just handed it to me this morning. Victor held the pendant, shaking it a few times. But you gave it to Leah, asking her to pass it to me. An entire night is enough for it to detect demonic presence. Then, Victor put the black crystal pendant back, pressing it against his chest. Kevlar looked at Victor, a bit surprised. She didn't expect Victor to be so knowledgeable. It felt to her as if he had been a demon hunter before. But that's impossible. Once a demon hunter, you can never become a mage. You called me here not just to verify me, but also to let your teammates find out whether there's a demon hiding near my home, right? In a few words, Victor had already pierced through all her thoughts. Kevlar couldn't believe it. She stared blankly at Victor, her mouth agape. I didn't want to harm you. I know, otherwise you wouldn't have entrusted your life to me. His gaze was calm and indifferent, like a narrator of a story, unconcerned with everything around him. But just then, a mysterious power suddenly emerged. Rocks were pierced by countless flowers, which then quickly grew. The flowers were of various colors, their blooming petals emitting bright light, completely surrounding Kevlar. The demon hunters stared wide-eyed at the scene before them, sensing a dangerous aura, a sense of unease rising in their hearts. Soon, this unease gradually became reality. The flower buds suddenly bloomed, and the exotic pollen was blown by the breeze, emitting a charming fragrance. The demon hunters, unfortunately, touched the pollen and immediately felt a strong drowsiness wash over them. Unable to control their bodies, they fell to the ground, falling into a deep sleep. Only Kevlar remained standing, still awake. She looked at Victor in surprise, disbelief flashing in her eyes. When you gave the pendant to Leah, I could have hidden the demon in advance. But I didn't. Kevlar's mind was shaken, as if she had heard something unbelievable. With these words, Victor essentially laid his cards on the table. He exposed that he really had a connection with demons. You really colluding with demons? She stared blankly at Victor, only to hear Victor's voice calmly respond to her. Of course not, because you got one thing wrong. Victor put his hands in his pockets, turning to face Kevlar directly. I indeed have not colluded with demons, because they're not worthy. This arrogant and cold statement, like a demon carrying a terrifying aura, enveloped Victor, quickly swallowing the entire space. A terrifying atmosphere spread, making one shiver. At this moment, Kevlar stared blankly at Victor, as if seeing the fierce shadow behind him, staring at her intently. I never needed demons to enhance myself. Victor slowly extended a hand, palm opening slowly. In his palm, 3 differently colored magatamas spun continuously, emitting a captivating glow. These 3 magatamas seemed to be enveloped in a dense magical power, forming 3 spheres, exuding an aura of calamity. Victor clenched his fist tightly, squeezing with force. Like being crushed, it erupted with astonishing magical power, like a vast ocean. The terrifying power condensed into reality. Lush green trees broke through the rock, rapidly growing in the vast cave. As the giant tree fully grew, its trunk gradually flowed with fiery red lava, the bright red flames completely igniting the branches and leaves, illuminating the surroundings. The wind surged, and the lava rolled continuously beneath the tree roots, the flames dancing with the storm. The terrifying pressure enveloped Kevlar, her brain nearly stalled for a few seconds, struggling to resist the overwhelming shock. She took a few steps back with difficulty. But she still asked without forgetting her original intention. Then, what about the demon you mentioned? Demon? Victor withdrew his hand, putting it back in his pocket. His expression was calm as water, yet exuded an unfathomable mystery. The terrifying apocalyptic scene seemed to be snuffed out, abruptly stopping, falling completely silent. Only a calm voice remained, carrying an incredibly arrogant tone, leaving Kevlar's mind blank, feeling only emptiness. A pet. That's all there is to it. Heaney had caused trouble. After returning to the mansion, Heaney kept bowing and apologizing to Leah non-stop. Leah couldn't help but hold her head in frustration. Heaney, you really surprised me this time. Leah truly hadn't expected this. Heaney, who always seemed soft and meek like a little lamb, had managed to punch the second prince into the air. According to the injury report, the second prince had several broken ribs and had passed out in the pool. She looked Heaney up and down, her mind drawing a blank. Heaney's physique didn't seem like it held any strength. How could she have injured the second prince so badly? If it hadn't been for the natural sparrow of Dean Rachel noticing the incident in time and using magic to retrieve the unconscious second prince from the water, the second prince might have lost his life in that deep pit. Heaney kept her head down, not daring to make a sound. Though it was Sapphiros who had struck the blow, Heaney didn't want to expose her. After all, she knew Sapphiros had only acted to help her. So, Heaney took the blame on herself. Closing her eyes and bowing her head, she quickly said, I will accept any punishment. I won't bring trouble to the Cravina family. Even going to prison is fine. Sigh. Leah let out a helpless sigh, placing one hand on her hip and shaking her head. The issue isn't about prison. For now, the matter had been suppressed, and not many people knew about the second prince's injury. But the fact that the second prince was still unconscious was a real problem. He had already been seriously injured before returning to the capital and had spent nearly half a month recovering at the Dillon family's residence. And now, shortly after his recovery, he had taken another hit from Heaney. The fact that no arrest warrant had been issued yet could be seen as the Emperor showing mercy on Victor's behalf. After all, no matter how incompetent the Emperor's son might be, he was still his son. It mainly depends on whether the second prince decides to make an issue of this. Also, for the next few days, don't leave the house. Wait for Victor to return before making any decisions. With that, Leah turned and left the room, leaving Heaney alone to calm down. After stepping out, Leah's expression instantly returned to calm. She didn't believe for a second that Heaney had done it. How fragile would the second prince have to be sent flying by a punch from someone as delicate as Heaney? It was clear someone else had injured the second prince, and Heaney was just taking the fall for them. But no matter what, she had to handle this matter. After all, Heaney was one of their own. Leah pulled out the crystal at her waist and held it in front of her. A faint glow swept across her face, and the white light deep within the crystal began to flicker. Hello, Gwen? Here's the thing, I need you to come over. Yes, to protect someone. On another mountaintop, a group of men wearing various masks stood. They were draped in identical cloaks, overlooking the capital. It was the attire of demon hunters. Among them, a masked woman slowly stepped forward, crossing her arms and speaking in a faint tone. The Karantia Empire. It's been a long time since I've been back here. Lady Kevlar has provided us with a lead. The Empire's second prince is highly likely to be colluding with demons, possibly even a primordial demon. A nearby demon hunter relayed information to her. After listening, she nodded. Additionally, a noble of the Empire, Victor Cravina, is also suspected of involvement with demons. But we need to consider the Mage Council, so we'll send a team to investigate first. Beneath her mask, her eyes burned with intense killing intent. Then let's begin. Verify, and then exterminate it. The setting sun gradually sank behind the western mountains, and the pale blue of dusk, speckled with stars, climbed into the sky. The cloaked demon hunters moved swiftly through the capital, their agile bodies darting silently across rooftops. Before long, they arrived at the Kravina mansion. As the first reconnaissance team, their primary objective was to investigate whether the Kravina family harbored demons. Another team, tasked with combat, was infiltrating the capital to locate the second prince. Any news from Lady Kevlar? Still nothing. One of the demon hunters spoke as he lowered his head. Forget it. We'll proceed without her. Victor Kravina isn't here, and the mansion's defenses are weak. We can infiltrate. Remember, our target is only the demons. Do not harm anyone else. Demon hunters never attacked ordinary people. The other hunters nodded silently. Understood. They leapt into the Kravina mansion, and as soon as they approached, they felt an overwhelmingly strong demonic presence. Their hearts pounded, and their throats tightened. The demon hunters instantly became serious. This filthy demonic aura was unmistakable. So, the Kravina family really does harbor demons. They exchanged glances and nodded, moving forward under the cover of darkness. They made no sound, not even the faintest rustle on the grass. Before long, they infiltrated the mansion. This feels too easy. One of the demon hunters muttered softly. Along the way, they hadn't encountered a single guard. The vast mansion felt as though it had been intentionally left open for them. The leader's expression grew grim. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Damn it, retreater. The rest of his words caught in his throat like a stone, unable to come out. A sharp, mocking voice echoed. Since you're here, don't be in such a hurry to leave. A black shadow, like a raven's silhouette, began spreading from the floor, engulfing the demon hunters completely. The hunters could only watch as their surroundings transformed. The walls seemed to twist and soften, and waves of darkness began to envelop everything. Even the moonlight had disappeared without them noticing. Then, the mocking voice rang out again. Let's play a game. Since you're here to find demons, then why not challenge one? In the boundless darkness, a colossal figure began to expand in the distance. The sound of cawing ravens echoed once more. Wrath. Don't kill them outright. As the words fell, a violent storm of crimson ants whirled in the darkness, dancing wildly. A massive red crocodile, towering like a giant, extended its long tongue, saliva dripping from its sharp teeth, its blood-red eyes glaring down at the demon hunters as if they were mere insects. A deep, resonant voice boomed. Embrace your destruction. Meanwhile, the combat team was darting through the capital's skyline, their shadowy figures gliding silently over rooftops and streets. As they hurried, they exchanged information. Captain, we've lost contact with the team infiltrating the Kravina mansion. It's as if they vanished into thin air. Demon hunters had a unique tool for communication. It was called their soul of the hunt. A small ornament crafted from black crystal, resembling an eye-shaped earring. These earrings were paired, allowing two teams to communicate during missions. Captain, what should we do? One of the hunters wearing the earring asked. The woman leading the group. Upon hearing the news of the missing team, the entire group hesitated. Even their footsteps noticeably slowed. The woman in front also reduced her pace. She was deliberating whether to turn back to assist or continue with their original mission. The royal palace, under the cover of night, was at its most vulnerable. At this hour, the old emperor would already be fast asleep. For a demon hunter with exceptional stealth abilities, infiltrating the palace would go unnoticed. The original plan was to confirm whether the second prince was indeed carrying a demon within him. If so, they would awaken the demon and lure it out. This way, even if a battle ensued, they could draw the demon away from the capital. The demon hunters awaited their leader's command, all eyes on the masked woman at the front of the group. She stopped atop a rooftop, standing on a chimney, narrowing her eyes as she gazed at the distant palace. You all return and support them. I'll infiltrate the palace alone. Upon receiving the order, the hunters all nodded firmly. None of them worried about her, as demon hunters never doubted this woman's strength. After all, she was one of the 7 strongest cadres among demon hunters. The team exchanged glances and dispersed into the shadows. Only the woman remained, staring in the direction of the palace. Her solo infiltration would actually be safer. Even if discovered, she could escape on her own. Aside from Aubrey, the old emperor, no one could stop her. She took a deep breath and pulled her hood lower. The clouds drifted away with the breeze, revealing the moonlight that spilled gently, like a broken lake, over her. It illuminated her silver hair, shining like a tranquil river. "I'm back, Aubrey." The hunters arrived just in time. As they crouched near the Cravina estate, all of them heightened their vigilance. The mansion was heavily guarded. Nearby stood a group of female guards clad in bone armor, each wielding sharp blades. Without exception, they all had furry animal ears perched atop their heads. Anyone unaware might assume the estate's owner had some peculiar hobbies. However, the hunters immediately recognized them. These were the Cravina family's demi-human squad, known as exotic beasts. They had earned overwhelmingly positive reviews in the southern adventurers' city. Praised endlessly in the south, word of this squad had spread throughout the Empire's nobility. Their performance had even caused the price of demi-human slaves to soar, as everyone aspired to train obedient demi-human guards like the Cravina family. Demi-humans were stronger than humans, cheaper, and more obedient. But now was not the time to discuss such matters. Around the estate, the hunters exchanged uneasy glances. They couldn't sense the presence of any other hunters here. That didn't make sense. The first team had clearly reported their arrival at the Cravina estate. Yet now, with the estate so heavily guarded, infiltrating it would be nearly impossible without the agility of a Cadre-level member. This left the hunters in a difficult position. For the sake of investigating the demon or finding their teammates, Thea must find a way to sneak in. Just as they began formulating a plan, they suddenly felt the moonlight dim. A shadow appeared beside them, accompanied by a cold, feminine voice. "You all want to go in?" The voice sent a shiver down their spines, cold sweat breaking out instantly. Someone was behind them. When had this person arrived there? They hadn't even sensed her presence. Her stealth skills were so advanced that even these hunters, experts in infiltration, hadn't noticed her. Danger. Before they could rise, the cold voice sounded again, then, "Can you take me inside with you, huh?" The hunters turned, startled, to face the mysterious figure. Under the moonlight, they could only see the figure cloaked entirely in a hooded cape, except for a pair of gleaming green eyes that shone like dangerous snake pupils. In the Cravina estate's living room, Gwendolyn was adorned in the armor Victor had gifted her. Luminescent energy flowed through the armor's seams, making her appear even more valiant. Gwen looked at Leah Cravina, sitting calmly on the sofa, and asked solemnly, "Leah, what exactly happened?" Leah showed no signs of panic. She poured tea from a porcelain teapot and even served Gwen a cup. "Don't get worked up. Sit down first, and we'll talk." Following Leah's suggestion, Gwen slowly took a seat. Leah handed the tea to Gwen. "Have some tea to refresh yourself, then we'll discuss it in detail." Gwen glanced at the reflection of her face in the red tea. She raised the cup and drank it in one gulp. Despite the bitterness, she remained composed, placing the cup down and looking directly at Leah. "Can we talk now?" Leah blinked, slightly surprised at Gwen's boldness. "Drinking tea so boldly. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were a man." Leah chuckled softly, taking a graceful sip from her own cup. Then, she called out to someone behind her, "Heaney, come out." From behind the wall emerged Heaney, looking timid and hesitant. Gwen turned to look as well. Heaney lowered her head, avoiding Gwen's gaze, her eyes darting nervously. "Miss Gwen, hello." Gwen found this peculiar. The girl seemed afraid of her. Leah introduced her with a smile. "This is Heaney, one of our family's retainers." She used to be Victor's assistant and helped him a lot. Upon hearing this, Gwen's impression of Heaney improved significantly. She stood up, approached Heaney, and extended a hand. "Hello, Miss Heaney. Thank you for taking care of Victor." Heaney panicked, raising her hands in front of her chest and waving them frantically. "No, it's Professor who's always taken care of me. I just helped him write speeches, substitute teach, clean the classroom and office daily, and prepare lessons. That's about it." Leah shrugged at Gwen, her expression saying, "See? What did I tell you?" The more Gwen listened, the heavier her heart felt. Finally, she clasped Heaney's hands firmly, her gaze earnest. "Miss Heaney, you are a good person." "Ah. What?" Heaney was at a loss, but as she felt Gwen's grip, she grew dizzy. "Ah. This righteous knight must be Victor's fiancée. Copyright. She was so radiant, noble, and passionate. The more Heaney thought about it, the more she felt unworthy of Victor. Only someone as exceptional as Gwen could match him. "I told you two would get along well," Leah teased, her face full of amusement. "After all, you share the same hobby." "Same hobby?" Gwen, ever straightforward, didn't understand Leah's implication. But Heeny's face turned bright red, her head lowering further in embarrassment. Leah didn't elaborate, simply waving her hand dismissively. "Back to serious matters. Gwen, I called you here because of Heeny." "Heeny?" Gwen released Heeny's hands and turned back to Leah, who nodded. "Yes. You probably don't know this, but the second prince was attacked. What?" Seeing Gwen's bewildered expression, Leah nodded and gestured to Heeny beside her. 5 broken ribs, lung hemorrhaging, and submerged in water for several minutes. He's still unconscious. "And yes, she did it." Gwen turned to Heeny, her eyes filled with disbelief. Heeny lowered her head even further. "Do you believe it?" Gwen shook her head vigorously. Naturally, she couldn't believe such a thing. When they shook hands earlier, Gwen had felt how frail Heeny was. How could someone like her break the ribs of an adult man like the prince? As the emperor's son, the prince surely had some skills of his own. Leah stood, hands on her hips, and sighed. "Regardless of whether she did it or not, until Victor returns, I need you to stay here. With your influence, even if the royal guards come, they won't be able to take Heeny away." Leah walked over to Heeny, wrapping an arm around her shoulders while her other hand began to roam. Heeny grew flustered, her face red, as she tried to push Leah's hand away. Ignoring Heeny's protests, Leah continued, "I don't want my delicate little assistant spending even a few days in prison." Finally, Leah's hand reached Heeny's chest and gave a light squeeze. Heeny let out an involuntary sound. "Ah!" Suddenly, Gwen tensed. Her legs shifted into a combat stance, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Her hand moved to the sword at her waist, sensing imminent danger. She swiftly drew her blade, turning toward the door. "Leah, Heeny, step back." Surprised by Gwen's sudden seriousness, Leah and Heeny obediently retreated a few steps. Gwen gripped her sword tightly, her arm muscles trembling slightly. Runes began to glow along the blade, emitting a red light that grew brighter. Flames violently coiled around the blade, crackling loudly. She could feel the footsteps growing closer. The danger was approaching. Finally, as the presence reached the door, Gwen let out a fierce shout, unleashing her pent-up energy. Her eyes locked firmly ahead. Wrath. Her arms surged with terrifying strength as she swung her blade. A red arc slashed toward the door. Boom! An intense heat wave erupted, spreading in all directions. The wooden door shattered into splinters, the debris embedding itself into the walls. The surrounding walls couldn't withstand the force and collapsed with a thunderous crash. The blinding flames illuminated the 3 women's faces as dust filled the air, enveloping them. Yet Gwen could still feel the danger lingering. She grew even more alert, lowering her stance and readying her sword once more. As the dust settled, a pair of black and white wings unfolded, shielding something within. The feathers on the wings burned with fierce flames, crackling audibly. Then, with a powerful sweep, the wings extinguished their flames. Under the moonlight, a pair of luminous green eyes shone brightly. They locked onto Gwen, as if marking her as prey. Blacklist detected an unnamed. Whitelist detected a Heeny. Whitelist appears threatened. Immediate protection required. In an instant, a long blade materialized in the woman's hand, which she raised defensively. The blade pointed at Gwen, her legs shifting into a combat stance. Her gaze turned icy. "Prepare for target elimination." Gwen focused intently on the figure of Sapphiros before her, her gaze extremely grave. No wonder she had sensed the aura of a monster from the start. Initially, she thought it was a monster invading the Cravina estate. Indeed, Gwen recognized the person before her. The very creature that appeared in the monster rift. Why was she here? Gwen raised her blade seriously, the sword trembling slightly as light gradually enveloped it again. She warned Leah and Heeny behind her. "Leah, prepare to escape. I'll hold her off, and try to find a way to notify Victor to return." Seeing Gwen so tense, Leah nodded solemnly. "All right." Since Gwen said so, it meant the woman before them was definitely not someone to be trifled with. At this moment, Leah glanced at the mage's hand worn on her hand. She did have a way to call Victor back directly, but the magic Victor stored for her was too terrifying, both in damage and range. It was among the top tier of third-level magic. If released here, the entire mansion might be destroyed. For now, she couldn't do that. In the blink of an eye, Sapphiros had already attacked. Her figure moved swiftly across the floor, the long blade in her hand ready to strike. I slash. The same move as last time. Gwen's eyes widened, staring hard at the cold blade coming at her. The white figure whipped up a gust of wind that grazed Gwen's face. In an instant, Sapphiros suddenly appeared behind Gwen. That flash of cold light, the terrifying pressure and threat seemed to transform into a gust of wind, rushing at Gwen's back. But Gwen was unafraid. Last time, she managed to withstand it, and this time, she could too. Gwen gripped her long sword tightly with both hands, her aura continuously rising. Light surged between her palms, and her silver-white hair spread out, wildly dancing in the air like silver serpents. Silver Knight's stance. The light in her palms quickly flowed to her limbs, a warmth seeping from her veins. She swiftly turned, positioning her long sword in front of her. In an instant, the red sword blade clashed with the long knife, exploding with a tremendous impact. The surrounding glass shattered completely, the clash of metal sending tremors through the air. Yet Gwen could clearly feel that her strength was slightly inferior. Feeling her power being gradually suppressed, she could only retreat slightly, flicking her long sword to deflect Sapphiros' silver blade. Stepping back a few paces, Gwen steadied her grip on the sword, resetting her stance, her gaze on Sapphiros growing even more serious. She had grown stronger since their encounter in the Monster Rift. Meanwhile, Leah, shielding Heaney beside her, watched the battle with bated breath. She bit her lip. What's Cocotte doing? How could she let a monster waltz in without stopping it? Is she still asleep? Meanwhile, in the garden of the Cravina estate, Cocotte lay atop a giant flower bud, sleeping soundly. Suddenly, she sneezed. Aku. She blinked her eyes open, groggily rubbing them, about to drift back to sleep. But through her sleepy eyes, she suddenly saw a sneaky, cloaked figure passing by. The demon hunter stopped in his tracks, turning to look at Cocotte in surprise. Their eyes met, a moment of silence ensued. The demon hunter was the first to speak. Hello? Cocotte smiled and nodded in response. Yo, a demon hunter. The next second, the ground began to churn, the earth trembling slightly. The demon hunter looked down, feeling the soil beneath his feet shaking. Suddenly, a vine shot up, breaking through the ground, wrapping around the demon hunter's ankles, suspending him high in the air. He flailed his body, struggling incessantly. Useless, stop struggling. Cocotte yawned, beckoning a cloud over. The white cloud floated lazily by, nearly veering off course into the garden wall. Cocotte flopped onto the cloud, drifting over to the demon hunter, watching him quietly. Did you come here specifically to help me with my performance evaluation? Thank you. In a good mood, Cocotte hummed a little tune. Thinking about catching a demon hunter sneaking into the Cravina house, Victor and his wicked sister would surely praise her. This way, next time something comes up, she could use this as a reason to take a justified leave. Cocotte lay on the cloud, burying her face in the white fluff, indulging in a peaceful fantasy. But suddenly, boom! A loud explosion echoed from the mansion. Cocotte started, blinking, and turned to look at the bound demon hunter. Have you demon hunters changed careers? Not catching demons anymore, but demolishing people's homes? Gwen and Sapphiros continued their high-speed battle, their speed so fast it was hard to see with the naked eye. The momentum kept rising, everything inside the house was being smashed to pieces. The fallen curtains caught fire, the flames roaring up. Yet, barely a minute had passed. Gwen's red sword swung continuously, clashing with Sapphiros' long knife. Sparks flew. Leah and Heaney huddled in a corner, watching the relentless battle with trepidation. Watching the surrounding furniture break, their hearts ached. All of this, it was money. But the priority was to get Heaney out first, then use the mage's hand to call Victor back. Leah thought so, turning to look at Heaney behind her. Heaney, let's. But she froze. At this moment, Heaney was staring blankly at the battle, muttering, she actually has wings. Heaney's mind was blank. The moment Sapphiros appeared, She recognized those familiar eyes. But what shocked her more was Sapphirose had wings on her body. Hini was completely stunned. She knew Sapphirose's back, hidden under the cloak, clearly had a protrusion. At first, Hini thought Sappirose was carrying something, like a backpack, or perhaps a physical ailment. She even considered the worst. But she never imagined Saphirose's body, like hers, had a big secret. They were drooping wings. No wonder her strength was so great, her actions so swift, even the magic within her was so chaotic. Because Sappirose was not human, Hini snapped back to reality, looking at the battle ahead. Gwen and Sappirose were evenly matched. The two clashed repeatedly, their swords colliding. Gwen's sword charged with energy, countering Saphirose's moves again and again. In the flash of cold light, Gwen's flame-wreathed greatsword always managed to block the blade at the last second, using the flames to create a gap between Sappirose and herself. Yet the massive impact still left her hands trembling, her form retreating a few steps. Saphirose's long blade didn't stop. Instead, the frequency of her attacks increased. Hini could clearly see Gwen was retreating under Saphirose's relentless assault, like a flood. Sappirose was truly strong. Hini slowly raised her head, eyes filled with worry. She clenched her fists slightly. And Leah's voice suddenly rang in her ear. "Hini, do you know that thing?" No one would mistake the current Sappirose for a human. Every time Sappirose swung her blade, the black and white wings behind her flapped in tandem. Like a completely cold-blooded monster, all remaining rationality was solely to kill the prey before her. Hini was startled by the question. Before she could respond to Leah, the battle not far away erupted with a loud crash. Bang! A burst of sound waves erupted, and Gwen was sent flying several yards. Her swaying body twisted mid-air, landing somewhat unsteadily on the ground. The gap in strength was too great. Before Gwen could reset her stance, Sappirose attacked again. The wings flapped, the white figure carrying a cold gleam, tearing through space, appearing before Gwen. This time, Gwen didn't even have time to assume a defensive posture. But just as Saphirose's attack was about to land, second-level magic, blue crystal veil. Instantly, a blue curtain rose from beneath Gwen's feet, quickly expanding to encircle her. The mist-like veil churned, and Sappirose felt her blade strike something soft, like a cloud. She withdrew slightly, flipping her body, stepping on the blue mist, using the rebound to push herself several yards away, distancing from Gwen. Her eyes flickered with a complex expression. A whitelist character was protecting a blacklist character. Unable to comprehend her, Hini, at this moment, raised a hand, bending over, panting heavily. The blue makeshift magic circle behind her lit up, then began to disintegrate, having shielded Gwen from a dangerous attack. Good thing. Made it in time. She couldn't perform magic as easily and quickly as Professor Victor with no incantation. So this timely shield spell took a considerable toll on her magic reserves. She felt as if her body was drained of energy, utterly exhausted. Sappirose held her long blade, her gaze puzzled, looking at Hini. The shield just now, if she wanted, she could have broken through it. But she didn't. Because at that moment, Hini had met her gaze. With a voice, she slowly spoke. Sappirose. Stop. Whitelist character request detected. A whitelist character request takes precedence over blacklist elimination. Command executed. Saphirose's A's were complex, taking another look at Hini. I just want to protect you. Before the words could finish, Sappirose had already sheathed her long blade. In the puzzled eyes of everyone, she flapped her massive wings, stirring up a gust. The next second, she shot into the sky like an arrow. In an instant, she vanished from sight. Everyone else, including Hini, watched Saphirose's departure in silence. At this moment, a white cloud drifted over. Cocotte looked around at the mansion, now resembling a ruin, leaning against the wall, poking her head out. Seeing Leo and the others' complex and serious expressions, she was utterly bewildered. Huh? What happened? Meanwhile, Gwen clutched her arm, looking up through the shattered glass. She gazed at the moon high in the sky, suddenly collapsing to the ground. Reaching into her armor, she took out two white feathers hidden within. As if unwilling, she gently clenched them. In the endless pitch-black space, It seemed as though everything around had been turned upside down. The sky was beneath their feet, and the earth hung overhead. The demon hunters were all wounded, their bodies covered in scars, lying haphazardly on the ground. Severed limbs were scattered everywhere, and the bright red blood stained the darkness with color. White bones protruded from chests, seemingly turned inside out. They had completely lost the ability to fight. The remaining demon hunters struggled to lift their heads with their last breath, their eyes red as they looked up in shock at the enormous demon beneath the sky. It exuded a filthy stench of blood and rust, with red blood slowly dripping from its claws. Its body seemed to be clad in a layer of crystalline red armor, glowing in the darkness. Red iron flakes danced madly in the surrounding darkness, swirling like a merciless meat grinder. The demon hunters could feel it. Yes, a demon. The terrifying presence before them could only be a demon. Upon seeing this crocodile-like behemoth, they felt their hearts race, blood rushing to their heads. The bloodline of the demon hunters was fully awakened. Their consciousness gradually blurred, and their sanity slipped away like flowing water. But the final result was, in the blink of an eye, they were utterly defeated. The colossal demon before them was not something low-level demon hunters could handle. It was overwhelmingly powerful, to the point of despair. Many demon hunters, after enduring that terrifying strike, had their legs broken, their spines twisted, even forced back to their senses. But now, they wished they were still in a berserk state. That way, perhaps they could numb themselves in the face of such a terrifying monster. Instead of experiencing the demon's horror firsthand, trembling and despairing. Demon hunters, afraid of demons. What an ironic thing. Suddenly, a sharp voice rang out from the darkness, "Enough playing, Wrath. We have other matters to attend to." The enormous demon tilted its head, hearing this, as if sighing. The surrounding iron flakes gradually calmed down, returning to the demon's crystalline red armor cracked and shattered. Countless shards of metallic debris hovered around the demon, spinning incessantly. One of the spinning fragments grazed Claudia's cheek, slicing her skin and drawing blood with just a light touch. Claudia slowly raised her head. Her half-bloodied face, with her crimson eyes seemingly enlarged, glowed with a deep red light. Her body entered a state of exhilaration, rising and falling with heavy breaths. Like a beast awakening from slumber, thunderous roars erupted from within her body. As one of the strongest 7 demon hunters, how would she fare against a primeval demon? Vega was deeply intrigued. Its voice rang out again, "If you win, I will allow you and your subordinates to leave the Empire safely. But if you lose..." A suffocating aura radiated from the crow, climbing into the sky and devouring the darkness. Endless darkness was soon engulfed by rolling clouds, and the gray-black layers churned violently. A massive single eye broke through the clouds, its vertical pupil opening wide as it gazed down upon the earth, exuding an air of absolute dominance. "Your entire life here will become my servitude, at my beck and call." Beyond the capital, the boundless plains swayed gently with the breeze. The moonlight draped over the grasslands like a silken veil, while the starry sky above twinkled endlessly. The arrival of a lone figure shattered the tranquility of the scene. Blue streaks of light descended from the sky, converging on the ground. The figure, clad in a jet-black coat, stood motionless as the wind tugged at the fabric. Victor stood quietly, as if waiting for something. Above him, Vega flapped its wings and descended, perching steadily on Victor's shoulder. Its sharp, grating voice echoed in Victor's ear. "Who would have thought, the Empress of the Empire turns out to be a high-ranking demon hunter?" "Victor, did you already know about this?" Strolling leisurely across the serene plains, Victor replied, "The bloodline of demon hunters needs to be passed down. It only transfers to the next when the previous one dies." The one who passed it to Claudia was her father, the head of the Stock family. There was a deep and complex story behind it. Through his conversations with the old emperor, Victor had pieced the puzzle together. With his hands in his pockets, he gazed at the starry sky. Her father was accused by Empress Claudia herself and personally sent to the execution platform. The Stock family was annihilated, leaving Claudia as the sole inheritor of her demon hunter father's bloodline, carrying her sorrow as she departed the Empire. Victor squinted his eyes and added, "But of course, the truth is far more complicated than I've just explained." "Well, I don't really care about that, Vega chuckled mischievously before continuing, but as you planned, Victor, I do need these strong and capable demon hunters. Indeed, it was all part of Victor's scheme. He had never worried about Kevlar suspecting whether his household harbored demons. On the contrary, the actions of these demon hunters provided Victor with an even better reason to keep them. If Leah was smart enough, those demon hunters who had infiltrated the household were probably already bound by a contract of servitude, ready to work for the Cravina family for life. Leah stood amidst the ruins of the living room, her face showing no trace of regret. In fact, she was calmly calculating the household's financial losses. Around her, a group of demon hunters was bound tightly by vines, standing with their heads lowered. Cocotte floated lazily on a cloud nearby, observing them with a supervisory air. Leah quickly finished her calculations, then held up the bill with a bright smile as she addressed the demon hunters. The damage to the house is minor, but those gold-threaded wooden furniture pieces, antiques, collectibles, and paintings are all ruined. Their total value. Leah deliberately dragged out her words, teasing the demon hunter's nerves. You owe us 20 million geo. And that's already rounding down. The demon hunters shuddered upon hearing the number. Several of them immediately began protesting. Those damages weren't entirely our fault. But if it weren't for you, our home wouldn't have been destroyed. Oh, and by the way, Leah said, narrowing her eyes and crossing her arms, her tone dangerously sharp, if you hadn't reminded me, I almost forgot. Breaking into my home and drugging my demi-human guards, leaving our defenses vulnerably, wasn't that your doing? Let's add another million as compensation for them. No objections, right? Her voice, like the whisper of a devil, lingered in their ears. No, it was even more terrifying than a devil. At least, compared to Leah, they would rather face a demon. But we don't have that much money. One of them stammered. That's simple, Leah replied, as if she had anticipated this. She suddenly grinned and pulled out a stack of prepared contracts, handing them out one by one. The demon hunters took the contracts, their faces bewildered as they read the terms. There are 20 of you here. If each of you works for my family for 10 years, the debt will be fully repaid. Oh, and during your service, none of you will have any free time. Understood? The demon hunters began trembling, shouting in protest. You devil. This is illegal detention. Illegal detention? Did you consider the consequences when you illegally crossed the border? Leah's ever-smiling face remained unchanged as she looked up and down at the protesting demon hunters. They grew even more terrified. After all, most of them weren't even citizens of the Empire. The Empire was so powerful that it needed no external forces or fanatical religions. Thus, the Demon Hunter organization could barely establish a foothold within the Empire. The Empire's laws were extremely strict. Illegal entry was already a serious crime, with deportation being the lightest punishment. Not to mention that they hadn't just entered illegally, they had also broken into the home of an imperial count. If caught by the Empire, they would likely be imprisoned for life. They had no choice but to submit. At that moment, a wooden plank on the ceiling began to wobble. Creaker. The large, unsteady plank fell from above, landing squarely on an intact, valuable vase in the corner of the living room. Crash. The vase shattered into countless pieces, fragments even striking the faces of the demon hunters. The demon hunters. Hearing the crash, Leah didn't even turn her head. She simply continued smiling and said in a calm tone, "Add another year." Dong. The palace gates slowly opened, and a crowd of nobles and ministers poured in. Aubrey, supported by his attendants, slowly approached the throne and sat down steadily. The moment the nobles and officials entered, they began their daily quarrels. It seemed as if they had an endless list of matters to report to the emperor every day. Among these, the most attention-grabbing issue was undoubtedly the incident of the second prince being assaulted. Such an event concerning a prince could hardly be concealed. Several ribs were broken. This could almost be considered an assassination attempt. The nobles set aside their own affairs and fervently discussed the prince's injuries. This matter must be thoroughly investigated. The prince's dignity is tied to the honor of the entire royal family. The old emperor rested one elbow on the armrest, supporting his face with his fist. He silently watched the ministers below, who were incessantly debating. He seemed somewhat uninterested. But soon, a report caught Aubrey's attention. "Your Majesty, the residence of Count Victor has been demolished." This news had nearly become the talk of the entire capital. The renowned Count Victor, a member of the council, known for his formidable strength and resolute actions, had his home destroyed. This was beyond anyone's expectations. The last time such news of a residence being destroyed spread, it was Victor who had demolished Jace Razor's mansion. That incident forced the Razor family to publicly yield to the Cravina family and offer compensation. Jace himself had fled the capital, never daring to return. But that was not the main point. The ministers continued their report. After his residence was destroyed, Count Victor and his family are preparing to return to Bristona Victor's domain. Hearing this news, many nobles visibly breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, they didn't even know why. It was just that hearing Victor's name brought an oppressive feeling. After all, in just a few months, Victor had transformed from a reviled figure to one admired by all. His presence alone dimmed the brilliance of all the talents in the capital. Now, hearing that Victor was leaving the capital, many people felt relieved. Upon hearing this news, the emperor merely nodded indifferently, saying nothing more. The emperor's prolonged silence cast a heavy atmosphere over the palace. Even the ministers fell silent. It was only then that they noticed something seemed different about the emperor today. Finally, Aubrey spoke. His first question was directed at the ministers below. "Where is Oiza? Has he awakened?" A minister, hearing the question, quickly stepped forward to report to the emperor, "Your Majesty, the second prince has regained consciousness, and his injuries are under control, though he still needs rest." Aubrey nodded and straightened his posture. "Bring Oiza here and tell him someone wishes to see him." "Yes, Your Majesty." A guard received the order and hurriedly left. The other nobles and ministers exchanged puzzled glances, unable to understand what the emperor intended. Why would His Majesty summon the gravely injured Oiza? After a while, the guard returned, pushing a wheelchair with Oiza seated in it. The second prince, heavily injured, had his chest trapped in bandages, presenting a pitiful sight. "Father." As he entered, he attempted to stand and salute the emperor, but the pain in his body made it impossible. He could only offer a bitter smile. Seeing the second prince in such a state, Aubrey waved dismissively. "Dispense with the formalities. Give him a seat." Servants brought over a chair, and the guards carefully moved the second prince onto it. Oiza sat heavily in the chair before turning to face the emperor again. "Thank you, father." The emperor turned to look at Oiza and asked, "Oiza, how many years has it been since your mother left the palace?" The second prince was puzzled but still replied, "Father, it has been 16 years." Aubrey leaned back in his chair, letting out a sigh. 16 years, is it? Have you thought about her?" The second prince was stunned. His mother had been gone for 16 years, and to be honest, he could barely remember her face, let alone hold any feelings for her. However, given that his father was asking this in front of all the nobles and ministers, he adjusted his expression. His face took on a sorrowful look, his furrowed brows seemingly conveying the pain of longing. "Mother has been gone for 16 years. During this time, I have always missed her. I constantly hope that life could return to how it was back then." Hearing this, Aubrey laughed, though it was unclear whether it was out of amusement or mockery. "Is that so?" He straightened his posture once more and, in the bewildered gazes of the ministers, said unhurriedly, "Claudia, come meet your child." At the mention of this name, the entire hall fell silent. Everyone froze, especially the second prince, whose facial muscles stiffened completely, his eyes widening in disbelief. Under everyone's gaze, a woman slowly emerged from the passage beside the throne. She wore luxurious garments adorned with golden threads, the hem embedded with thin, shimmering emeralds. Her golden earrings and bracelets sparkled as well. Following behind her were several maids, all respectfully bowing their heads. An aura of grace and nobility radiated from her, and the crown on her head gleamed brilliantly under the sunlight. She stood beside the emperor, her head slightly lowered, a gentle smile on her face as she looked at the second prince, speaking softly, "It has been a long time, my child." The nobles, upon seeing Claudia, were filled with shock. The majesty in Claudia's eyes enveloped everyone present, silencing the ministers entirely. There was no mistaking it. After 15 years, the Empress had returned. The ministers stood frozen, staring at Claudia with mouths agape, unable to utter a word. By her age, Claudia, like Aubrey, was nearing 60. Yet she still looked youthful, appearing more like a woman in her 30s. The most shocked of all was the second prince. Sitting in his chair, he stared dumbfounded at the regal woman before him. That was his mother, Claudia. He still remembered. Years ago, when his parents had fallen out, his mother had resolutely left the capital, leaving the empire behind. At that time, he was only 14. And now, she had returned, still as dignified and elegant as she had been 15 years ago. Mother, mother? The second prince's voice trembled as he uttered in disbelief. No one knew why Claudia had chosen to return now. But even after her departure, the title of Empress had always remained hers, as Aubrey had never appointed a successor. Claudia approached the second prince, circling him as if inspecting something. The second prince didn't understand her actions. Truthfully, he felt no emotional attachment to this long-absent woman. His feelings were calm to the point of indifference. Yet being scrutinized by Claudia brought him an inexplicable sense of unease. It was as if needles were piercing his skin, a mix of pain and emptiness. Finally, Claudia stopped in front of the second prince, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Recover well, my child. We will have more time together in the future." With that, Claudia clasped her hands in front of her skirt, lowered her gaze slightly, and exuded an air of composure and grace. She then bowed gently to Aubrey before turning and leaving. The second prince sat in his chair, his gaze fixed on Claudia's departing figure, watching her leave. The news of Claudia's appearance in the palace caused an uproar in the capital. The streets and alleys buzzed with discussions, and every newspaper headline was about the return of the imperial empress. In mere moments, the news had spread throughout the noble circles. After all, the empress's iron-fisted methods had left a deep impression on everyone. She was the one who had personally sent her own family to the execution platform. The true culprit behind the extinction of the Stork family. After purging the Stork family, Claudia had left the empire, vanishing for 15 years. No one knew why she had chosen to leave after committing righteous patricide. But at the time of her departure, another piece of news had surfaced. The emperor's other wife, the daughter of the Grand Duke of the Kant Kingdom, had died in childbirth after giving birth to Orléans. For a time, all blame was directed at Aubrey. Likewise, no one understood why, in a single night, both of the emperor's wives had departed from his life. That morning, Orléans was strolling in the garden. She made it a habit to adjust her mood in the palace gardens, and during these moments, she was often alone. But today was different. While picking flowers, Orléans sensed an unfamiliar presence approaching from behind. She turned around to find a woman dressed in luxurious attire, crowned with a radiant tiara, smiling warmly at her. The tiara. Orléans took special note of it, but she did not recognize the woman. Before she could ask, Claudia spoke first. "You must be Orléans, correct?" Hearing the woman's gentle voice, Orléans felt a strange sense of comfort and nodded blankly. "And you are?" "You probably have never seen me before." Claudia walked closer, looking at Orléans with a soft expression, reaching out to touch her face. There was a hint of nostalgia in her eyes. "You are so beautiful. Even more so than your mother." Orléans blinked. "Mother?" The word felt distant to her. She had always been told that her mother had died in childbirth. She had never known maternal love and had no concept of what a mother was. But the woman before her was overwhelmingly gentle. Bathed in sunlight, she seemed to radiate a maternal glow. Orléans found herself momentarily lost in thought. If she had a mother, what would she be like? So she asked, "Did you know my mother?" Claudia merely smiled and replied, "I didn't just know your mother. I knew your father, your two brothers, and your teacher of Victor Cravina." A giant blue light emerged from a patch of grass, with blue patterns spreading out across the space. A violent gust of air erupted instantly from the deep and illusory tunnel, flattening the lush green grass completely. A group of people slowly stepped out from the massive blue gate. The mansion appeared so serene that the birds perched quietly on the branches were startled by the magic, scattering in all directions. Leah surveyed her surroundings, a look of contentment spreading across her face. We've arrived. This was Heeny's first time here. After stepping out of the portal, she looked around at the incredibly natural scenery, her eyes sparkling like little stars. Wow, it's huge. She stretched out her finger, pointing at the ancient mansion, and exclaimed in amazement. Vanilla dragged the luggage and was the first to enter the mansion to settle the bags. After a while, a rumbling sound, akin to small earthquakes, echoed through the ground, sending vibrations underfoot. A deep, resonant voice came through. "Master, Miss Leah." "Welcome back." A bear man butler stood beside them all. His towering frame was immensely robust, and his steady breathing, accompanied by the rise and fall of his chest, resonated in everyone's ears. His gentle eyes carried a hint of sternness, and a terrifying aura gradually emanated from between his brows. Heeny and Cocotte both gaped in astonishment. So big. But Cocotte quickly discerned the identity of this enormous figure. Is this a bear man? A bear man here? The notoriously aggressive and ferocious bearman race seemed so peaceful here. Moreover, his every movement exuded elegance, as if he were a gentleman. The massive bear man looked at them warmly and bowed slightly. Terrifying, elegant, powerful. Could this be the family creed of the Cravine household, that even a bear man must uphold? Cocotte was taken aback. At this moment, Leah pulled Heeny in front of her and solemnly addressed Helnison. "Mr. Helnison, please prepare a room for her. As for the elf, she won't need one. She'll find a garden to sleep in herself." The bearman nodded and bowed slightly to Heeny, saying, "This way, miss, please follow me." Heeny was startled, looking at Helnison with a mix of fear and awe. After all, she had never seen such a massive person before. Helnison, like a small giant, truly imposed an intimidating presence. She turned around nervously, glancing at Victor and then at Leah. Leah nodded at her, offering a reassuring smile, and continued, "Follow Mr. Helnison to get your room ready. I'll take you to the city for a stroll later." The Cravina mansion was not located inside Briston but was built separately outside. From the mansion to the city, it was at least about 1.24 miles away. Heeny nodded, calming herself before following Helnison into the mansion. After watching the two leave, Cocotte floated on her cloud to Victor's side and whispered, "Hey, that's a bear man, right? How did you manage this?" As a top-tier mage, she could clearly sense the power contained within this bear man. Perhaps he could kill her with a single punch. It wasn't that Cocotte thought he was stronger than her. After all, she was just a mage with a frail physique. Victor glanced at Cocotte and said indifferently, "You should know, I'm not omnipotent." Cocotte leaned back slightly, raising her eyebrows in surprise. "What? This has nothing to do with you?" Seeing this, Leah began explaining beside her, "Helnison has been working in our family since my grandfather's generation. The many demi-human guards you see are all thanks to his training." Cocotte's jaw dropped. This was truly beyond her expectations. Moreover, the restrained energy within Helnison's body was also beyond her comprehension. What exactly was his profession? Martial master. That's Helnison's profession. Victor's voice drifted faintly into her ear. Martial master? As a former council member of the Mage Council, Cocotte's knowledge was naturally extensive. But now, for the first time, she felt her knowledge was insufficient. Victor didn't elaborate further, sticking his hands in his pockets and continuing forward. The black crow perched on his shoulder ruffled its feathers, yawning as it stood on his shoulder. At this moment, Victor's voice came from the side. "You just need to know that in the entire empire, Helnison is the only martial master." Martial master was an extremely unique profession, distinct in both strength and the method of advancement. It was essentially a branch of their warrior class, also not requiring mana consumption. However, what set martial masters apart from traditional warriors was their need to cultivate natural energy, This energy was also known as Qi. Only when the amount of Qi stored in the body reached a certain threshold could one qualify to become a martial master. And that was just the basics. Martial masters did not advocate for killing and fighting. They needed to spend time nurturing Qi. This practice not only granted martial masters healthier and stronger bodies but also extended their lifespans. Thus, the more Qi a martial master nurtured, the stronger they became. Conversely, martial masters who frequently engaged in combat would lose Qi, causing their physical condition to weaken temporarily. As a result, the strength of martial masters was inconsistent, and few players in the game would specialize in this class. While Cocotte was still pondering, Leah suddenly spoke up. "All right, have you talked enough? If so, we should get going." Cocotte tilted her head in confusion and asked, "Where to?" Leah smiled mysteriously at her and said, "To a place where elves belong." Thick smoke billowed. The crisp sound of metal clanging and the collision of materials filled the massive workshop. Dozens of workers bustled about, carrying various materials and metals in their arms, crafting something with precision. When they saw Victor and Leah standing at the workshop's entrance, all the workers stopped what they were doing and bowed respectfully to Victor. "Lord Count." "Good day, Lord Count." "Good morning, Lord Victor." These workers greeted Victor with utmost respect, their movements perfectly synchronized. Victor gave a slight nod without much response, continuing to walk forward as if it were nothing. The black crow on Victor's shoulder cackled mockingly in his ear. "Well, Lord Victor, what an air of authority you have." Victor shot the talkative crow a displeased glance but did not respond. This show of respect wasn't born out of admiration. It was a matter of survival, to avoid being targeted. Strictly speaking, this was one of Victor's past mistakes. Many places had changed their perception of Victor due to his actions, transforming his reputation from infamously notorious to that of a widely recognized genius mage. Except in Victor's hometown, Bristol. In that city, too many people had suffered because of Victor's past deeds. Even the stray dogs on the streets looked down on Victor. No matter how good Victor's reputation was elsewhere, in Bristol, in Victor's home, the workers would only have one thought: is this really the same Victor? As the group ventured deeper into the factory, Cocotte curiously observed her surroundings. Dozens of craftsmen surrounded an extremely long table, performing repetitive tasks like installing components and calibrating precision. Soon, a pitch-black firearm was assembled and hung on a wall along with a row of finished products. Cocotte watched from the side, her eyes wide with amazement. What kind of strange contraption was this? Victor, hands still in his pockets, casually asked Leah, "Is this ready for mass production?" "You know, making this kind of firearm isn't difficult, but we're short on energy resources." Leah shrugged helplessly and replied, "We can only produce 10 of these handguns per day." Leah stepped forward, ignoring the craftsman, and grabbed a finished product from the wall. With her thumb, she flicked off the safety, raised her arm, squinted, and aimed at a distant target. Then, she pulled the trigger. Bang! Compressed magical energy burst out with tremendous force, and a black iron projectile shot out, shattering the wooden target suspended in midair. Cocotte, having never seen such a spectacle, was momentarily stunned. She could sense that Leah possessed no magical energy, yet the weapon's casual power was comparable to a small cannonball. This was far more convenient than a bow and arrow, she thought. Leah returned the handgun to the wall and picked up a semi-finished product from a craftsman. The unfinished gun was different from the finished ones, with a green eagle engraved on it. She examined it closely before handing it to Cocotte, saying, "Try channeling the natural energy that elves are best at." "Huh?" Cocotte took the gun, weighed it in her hand, and, though puzzled, followed Leah's advice. Her palm began to glow green as natural energy started to coil around her arm. The entire gun was gradually enveloped in light, which flowed into the pre-designed eagle engraving. The green light slowly traced the edges and finally gathered in the eagle's sharp eyes. It was as if the eagle had opened its eyes, its lines becoming vivid and clear. Cocotte was still confused as Leah took the gun back from her hands, examining it up and down. Then, She skillfully picked up 6 iron bullets from the table and loaded them one by one. Aiming at the target again, she pulled the trigger. In an instant, a green energy burst violently from the barrel, and the bullet tore through the air at terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, the light pierced through the wooden target, and a fierce gale erupted around it. The power was twice as strong as before. Cocotte. An ominous feeling suddenly rose in Cocotte's heart. Leah put down the gun and flashed a radiant smile at Cocotte. As expected of the Elf Queen. "All right, now let me think about how to make full use of you." Her premonition came true. While Cocotte was still in a daze, Victor picked up the handgun that Leah had just used and examined it carefully. A panel suddenly appeared before him. "New weapon discovered. Please name it." Victor raised his hand, scrutinizing the weapon, and asked Leah beside him, "Does this thing have a name?" Leah placed one hand on her hip, spreading the other with a helpless expression. "How could I dare name it without the master's permission?" At that moment, Victor raised his arm, aiming the gun at a target. Green natural energy began to gather around the gun, drawing light from its surroundings and concentrating it in the eyes of the engraved eagle. As the light flickered across the gun's body, a slight tremor ran through his arm. Bang! A luminous bullet tore through the air, unleashing terrifying natural energy as it surged forward with immense force. The surrounding air erupted into a gust of wind, scattering dust everywhere. Victor could even feel the overwhelming pressure transmitted from the gun to his arm. The wooden target shattered completely under the devastating attack, splintering into tiny fragments, some even reduced to blackened charcoal. Cocotte, watching from the side, was utterly stunned, her mouth agape in disbelief. This thing could even be mass-produced? As the dust settled, the gun's barrel glowed red, with wisps of white steam rising from it. Fortunately, the craftsmanship of the family's artisans had held up, and the gun remained intact. Victor spoke, "Let's call it Windhawk." A peculiar panel floated in the air. Weapon type Unlucky A firearms. Windhawk. Effect, base damage, 100, ammo, 6.6, shooting interval, 0.2 seconds, effective range, 200 yards. Fastest reload time, 1 second. Skill, Arcane Arrower. You can consume mana to enhance base damage and charge shots while firing. The charge can consume all ammo, increasing bullet size by 600% a 6000% and extending attack range to 600 a 6000 yards. New subclass Unlucky A Gunslinger. You can freely gift this weapon. The recipient will gain a new subclass A Gunslinger. The Gunslinger class was a new profession introduced in the 3rd chapter of the game. In the game's storyline, after the deaths of 2 princes, the Razor family, who supported the Crown Prince, faced total annihilation. The family's secret weapon, developed with the help of elves, was exposed. The royal family took over the production of these special weapons, refining them further until firearms became available for players to use. By the 3rd chapter, players could choose to switch to the Gunslinger class or equip firearms as a secondary profession. Unlike a main profession, a secondary profession couldn't upgrade skills or replace the primary class. It also came with strict attribute limitations. In any case, after the total destruction of the Razor family, their invention made a significant contribution to the Empire. Now, Victor hadn't expected to introduce this profession ahead of its time. He casually set down the firearm and asked Leah, "Can we manufacture the magic cannon that Helnason brought back earlier?" Leah spread her hands. "Previously, we couldn't. After all, we only had one elf to provide natural energy." But now, her gaze fell on Cocotte, scanning her up and down like she was a treasure trove, her eyes gleaming. Cocotte shivered, growing even more apprehensive. A while later, the 3 left the workshop and ventured deeper into the forest. Following Leah's lead, they arrived at a luxurious courtyard surrounded by Beastfolk guards. Upon seeing Leah, the guards saluted her in unison. She glanced around but didn't see the familiar figure she was looking for. She turned to the guards and asked, "Where's Leon? Why isn't she here?" The Beastfolk guards exchanged glances before explaining, "Miss Leah, Lady Leon had an argument with Lexi and isn't in a good mood." Leah was puzzled. Leon, who rarely interacted with others, had argued with another elf, Cocotte, floating idly nearby, blinked upon hearing Leon's name. "Leon? Who's that?" "Your sister." Leah nodded. "Something like that." After responding, she continued forward, with Victor and Cocotte following behind. "Come inside." The three entered the courtyard, surrounded by lush flowers and towering ancient trees. The thick natural energy in the air brought a sense of comfort that relaxed their entire bodies. Leah turned to Cocotte and said, "Weren't you curious about where we sent your clanswoman, Lexi?" Cocotte froze, confused. Leah led her to a corner and pointed ahead. "See for yourself." An elf lay on a rocking chair, dressed lightly, swaying back and forth under the sunlight filtering through the dense leaves. In front of her was a clear pool, with several maids massaging her. The scene was idyllic. Cocotte stared, dumbfounded. She pointed at Lexi, then slowly turned to Victor with an incredulous expression. "She? Me?" ? Leah even took the initiative to greet her. "Yo, Lexi." Lexi raised her delicate face, her bright eyes lighting up as she smiled sweetly at Leah. "Miss Leah." The surrounding maids bowed slightly to Leah, who nodded gently in acknowledgement, signaling them to leave. Lexi jumped off the rocking chair, her petite figure exuding the unique charm of an elf. "How are you feeling?" "Life here is so good, I don't miss home." "Yay!" The two high-fived, leaving Cocotte utterly bewildered. "What is this?" "The Razor family's energy extraction method," Victor explained blandly. "They keep elves happy to harvest their natural energy as a resource." "But you don't need that, huh?" Cocotte was already powerful enough to generate natural energy without relying on emotions. She could directly draw from nature if she wished. Hearing this, Cocotte's heart sank. She had come first, yet why was her treatment so much worse than her clanswoman's? And the later arrival was her clanswoman, no less. Both were elves. How could the disparity be so vast? Lexi noticed Cocotte and waved cheerfully. "Your Majesty." Cocotte remained silent. At this moment, she didn't want to say a word. "What's wrong with her?" Lexi asked Leah, puzzled. Leah smiled and replied, "Nothing." "By the way, have you produced today's quota?" Lexi blushed, fidgeting shyly. "Miss Leah, please. Wait a moment." She quickly retreated into her room. Curious, Cocotte wondered how Lexi produced natural energy. Soon, Lexi emerged, her clothes slightly disheveled, her face flushed. She held a transparent bottle containing a fragrant liquid that was soothing to the senses. "This is today's energy," she said shyly, handing the bottle to Leah. Leah took it with a smile. "Not bad, not bad." Lexi tidied her clothes, nodded bashfully, and returned to her room. Shaking the bottle in front of Cocotte, Leah asked, "Can you produce energy as concentrated as this?" Cocotte: "So tiring. Maybe I should just go back to being a queen." Leah stowed the bottle away and continued, "Of course, I won't force you. It's just that we have so few elves here." Sighing dramatically, she added, "If only we had more elves, we wouldn't have to trouble our esteemed elven queen to work." Cocotte sat cross-legged on a cloud, eyes closed. "I understand, but I can't do it. I can't lure my people to interact with humans." Leah calmly observed her, smiling faintly. Cocotte opened her eyes and solemnly declared, "Besides, I haven't returned to the elven forest in a long time. Without my authority, they won't listen to me." Leah's smile deepened, her expression tinged with mischief. "Oh? But if they wanted to interact with us, you wouldn't stop them, right?" Cocotte replied coolly, "Elves are born the freest race. Even a queen has no right to interfere with their choices." "Excellent. That's all I needed to hear," Leah said, grinning. Before Cocotte could grasp Leah's intentions, a broad hand rested on her shoulder. She turned to meet Victor's gaze. In his eyes, she saw three distinct, powerful energies emanating simultaneously. His cold voice carried an undeniable authority that made her instinctively want to submit. "I will ensure you remain the Elven Queen, in a way you're willing to accept. The place where the elves reside is the Elf Forest. This forest does not exist in any fixed location on the continent. Instead, it resides in a far more peculiar dimension, detached from reality. Even in the game, entering the Elf Forest was an extremely complex task. Only elves could traverse freely between the Elf Forest and the real world. For elves are beings of freedom. As long as they wish, They can create a passage connecting the elf forest and the real world. User: if you want to enter the elf forest, it's simple. All you need to do is communicate with the natural spirits. Cocotte sat atop a cloud, patting the fluffy surface beneath her as she spoke leisurely, but almost no human can achieve that. Communicating with the natural spirits was an ability exclusive to elves. To the elves, the natural spirits were akin to a benevolent and powerful mother. Should an elf face a crisis or suffer harm or coercion, the natural spirits would intervene to punish those who hurt or attempted to hurt the elves. Other than that, the natural spirits refused to interact with any race other than elves. Victor Cravina sat with his hands in his pockets, one leg crossed over the other, quietly listening to Cocotte's words. Cocotte wasn't saying all this for any particular reason. She simply wanted to dissuade him from entertaining the idea of entering the elf forest. Of course, Victor himself understood that the elf forest was not a place one could enter at will. At this stage, he had no means of entering it on his own. The entire elf forest consisted of 7 fragmented continents. At its very center stood the Yade Divine Tree, the mother tree that nurtured the elves, tirelessly providing them with energy. The other continents were divided into 6 domains, each corresponding to a different natural element. Reaching the Yade Divine Tree at the heart of the elf forest was an almost impossible feat. The 6 elemental domains alone were enough to keep all intruders at bay. If the elf forest was so easily accessible, the Razor family wouldn't have managed to collect only a few hundred elves for their service over so many years. After all, the vast elf forest was home to millions of elves. You dislike the Yade Divine Tree, don't you? Victor said calmly. Cocotte looked at Victor with a serene expression but sighed helplessly. I don't dislike the Yade Divine Tree. The Yade Divine Tree was the birthplace of all elves, akin to their mother. But in Cocotte's eyes, there was a trace of melancholy. I just don't like the way the Yade Divine Tree operates. From the moment an elf was born, the Divine Tree would assign them a surname and a specific mission. However, the Divine Tree's method of forcibly imposing a singular mission and surname upon the elves, without considering their willingness, was crude and oppressive. Cocotte found this deeply objectionable, for it violated the very essence of what elves stood for: freedom. Thus, she sought to abandon everything, to distance herself from the title of Elf Queen, to escape the elf forest, simply to live freely. Even if it was just to sleep freely. Victor's eyebrows gradually lifted as he said indifferently, are there elves born without a surname from the Yade Divine Tree? Cocotte froze for a moment, then raised her head. That, before I left, I had never seen an elf without a surname. If such an elf exists, it could only be due to an error by the Yade Divine Tree. But the Divine Tree does not make mistakes. Cocotte was puzzled, even doubtful. How could an elf without a surname exist? Victor stood up, hands still in his pockets, and walked to Cocotte's side. A broad hand rested on her shoulder. Her delicate body trembled slightly as she stared blankly at Victor. Victor exuded an aura of strength and confidence, leaving Cocotte momentarily dazed. His sharp eyes locked onto hers. I have always believed that the Divine Tree is merely an external object. Even without the Divine Tree, you are still the queen among elves. The strongest elf? Cocotte. No one doubted Cocotte's strength, even if she had grown so lazy that she barely moved. But there was no denying that she was the most powerful elf in the history of the elven race. Cocotte stared blankly at Victor. Before she could grasp what he meant, he suddenly said, Come, I'll take you to see an elf. Once you see her, you'll understand what I mean. Bristol and the interaction between Leo and Henny. Bristol, the second most prosperous city in the entire empire. Shops lined both sides of the streets in an orderly fashion, nearly squeezing out all the surrounding buildings. Carriages moved slowly along the roads, their wheels rolling over the smooth cobblestones with a crisp sound. People bustled shoulder to shoulder, their faces brimming with joy. Every now and then, someone would squeeze out of the crowd and enter one of the shops. Henny followed closely behind Leah Cravina, while Leon walked on Leah's other side, her hood pulled low to conceal her face as they navigated through the throng. Leon always stayed close to Leah, fulfilling her duty as a guard. Henny's eyes widened with wonder upon her first visit to Bristol. While it was as bustling as the capital, It felt refreshingly new to Heaney. Though she had lived in the capital for a long time, she had never strolled around so freely. Bristol was different from the capital. The capital was teeming with nobles coming and going daily, their presence a constant on the streets. Bristol, however, was somewhat less ostentatious. Here, one rarely saw prominent figures. The wealthy merchants and gentry who resided in Bristol often traveled for trade and rarely stayed in the city, and it was even rarer to see nobles with titles here, for this was Cravenna territory. Even among the upper echelons, no one held more sway here than Leah and Victor. Leah looked at Heaney and smiled. "How do you feel? Do you feel like settling down in Bristol?" Compared to the fast-paced life of the capital, the people of Bristol lived slow and relaxed lives. Heaney nodded, then shook her head. "This place is wonderful, I like it very much, but..." Although this was Professor Victor's hometown, he himself rarely stayed in Bristol for long. Heaney knew that Professor Victor was like a spinning top, always busy and never stopping. "So I don't think I'm suited to live here." She preferred to follow Professor Victor rather than settle in one place and live an ordinary life. Had she not met Victor, Heaney might have found Bristol quite appealing. "Is that so?" Leah nodded knowingly. At that moment, the crystal ball at her waist grew warm. Leah seemed to understand something and turned to Leon, saying, "Leon, you should head back." Leon frowned slightly, her tone laced with concern. "Miss Leah, what about you?" "There's someone you need to meet back at the house." "And also." Leah pulled Heaney closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders with a smile. "Don't worry, I still have a genuine mage with me." "Actually, there's also Mr. Crocodile," Heaney thought shyly to herself, lowering her head without saying a word. Victor and Leon's meeting. Swish, swish, swish. A figure darted swiftly through the city skyline. The wind roared in Leon's ears as she sped across the rooftops of Bristol. Dusk was falling, and by the time Leon reached the old Cravenna estate, the moon was already high in the night sky, casting its pale glow over the land. She had raced from the bustling streets of Bristol to the gates of the Cravenna estate at full speed, only to stop without breaking a sweat. The guards at the gate saluted her respectfully upon her arrival. "Lady Leon, the master is waiting for you in the backyard." "The master?" Victor? Leon was genuinely taken aback. She had never had any direct interaction with Victor before, nor had she ever revealed her identity as an elf to him. Though she suspected Victor had long known the truth. She recalled the last time Victor had spoken her name aloud in her presence, leaving her feeling a mix of tension and unease. Now, with a heart full of apprehension, Leon made her way to the backyard of the Cravenna estate. The backyard was vast, stretching so far it seemed to merge with the horizon, a field so expansive it resembled a sprawling meadow. Victor stood in the middle of the field, hands in his pockets. The night wind was restless, tugging at Victor's coat, the black fabric dancing under the moonlight. Sensing her arrival, Victor turned his head to look at Leon, a raven perched on his shoulder, its single eye gleaming with an eerie light. "You're here," Victor's cold voice rang out. Leon, unsure of how to interact with Victor one-on-one, fidgeted slightly, her hands awkwardly at her sides. Finally, as if surrendering to the situation, she clasped her hands together and bowed deeply. "Master." "What are your orders?" Victor stood on the vast field, his gaze lowered. He reached out a hand and gently stroked the raven's small, black head. "An elf once told me that all that natural elves are given surnames." But her words have left me with questions. His deep eyes locked onto Leon as his calm voice echoed in the night. "Tell me, Leon. What is your surname?" "My surname?" Leon was utterly puzzled. She had never thought about this question before. Because she was born without a surname. Ever since being cast out by those so-called kinfolk, she had wandered aimlessly through the human world. With a strong sense of justice, she roamed the world like a lone ranger, calling nowhere home. She was passionate about punishing evil and helping the poor, even robbing the rich to aid the needy. Yet, the humans she saved would often turn against her, repaying her with hatred and anger in the end. But upon seeing her pointed ears, their attitudes would shift dramatically because she was an elf. So, she donned a mask and pulled up her hood. She hid the identity of the race, which she despised. To act righteously, one did not need a race or even a name. Thus, She spent decades in the human world, living such a life. She had witnessed all human emotions: joy, fear, happiness, disgust. It was like a vast, interwoven net trapping everyone within. And she was merely an observer, standing outside the net. Until one day, while concealing her face, she arrived in the Empire. Just as she was about to rescue a group of subhumans imprisoned by humans at the port, she saw a little girl. The girl stood on the broad shoulders of a bear man, waving her arms with excitement, her eyes sparkling like stars. The bear man, like a wild beast, charged into the crowd of subhuman traffickers, scattering them with bone-cracking blows, each sound clear to her ears. The little girl rescued the subhumans and kindly shared food with them. To humans, those subhumans were uncommunicative beasts, yet she treated them as equals, as if she ignored the disdain between races. Leon could feel that this little girl genuinely regarded those subhumans as beings she could communicate with. And what about me? At that moment, Leon reflected on herself. An elf without a surname, not even a name. She had been cast out by elves, by her own kind. Ironically, elves did not consider her one of them, yet humans would bow to her because of her pointed ears. As she lowered her head and smiled bitterly, she felt a tug on her pants. The adorable little girl stood before her, looking up and extending her small hand, offering her a piece of bread. "Are you hungry?" Mr. Helnison said. "You've been watching us for a long time." Leon's heart trembled slightly. Driven by some inexplicable impulse, she removed her hood and mask. She wanted to see how the little girl before her would react upon seeing her true self. But the girl remained calm, showing no surprise that she was an elf. She merely raised her hand higher, still holding the bread out to her. "You're an elf? But elves need to eat too." Leon dumbfoundedly took the bread, finally seeing the girl's beaming smile. Sunlight bathed her face, a faint halo glowing behind her. "My name is Leah." "What's yours?" "I have no name." "You're very pretty, but not as handsome as my brother." "I like the way you lift your head. That way, everyone can see your eyes so they're as beautiful as emeralds." "Can I give you a name?" "Lift your head, hold it high." "From now on, I'll call you Leon." Dazed, Leon snapped back to reality. She took a few steps back, her guard up. An illusion? When did it happen? As she lifted her head, Leon's gaze met that of the crow. The crow's single eye still glimmered with a sinister, enchanting light. "I see." Victor nodded, as if he completely understood, his hands in his pockets. "Because you have no surname, you were cast out by the elves." "No wonder, as an elf, you detest other elves so much." At the same time, Victor felt a twinge of curiosity. Born from the Yade sacred tree like all other elves, why did Leon lack a surname and a name? Could it be that, in the eyes of the Yade sacred tree, she was a defective product? He quietly observed Leon. Leon crouched slightly, her emerald-like eyes, clear and bright, fixed on Victor. Under the moonlight, they shone brilliantly. "Indeed, they are very beautiful eyes," Victor remarked. "I never doubted Leah's sense of aesthetics." Leon gazed at him, her tone indifferent as she spoke. "And then? Now that you know all this, what do you plan to do with me?" Victor did not respond, nor did he make any move. He simply stood there quietly, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, Leon froze. She felt the warmth of an embrace, holding her from behind. A gentle breeze blew, lifting the hood from Leon's head, revealing her golden hair and pointed ears. Her flowing golden hair danced in the air, while Leon, dazed, leaned into the warm embrace, unsure how to react, until a gentle voice whispered in her ear, "Child, you've suffered enough." Elvish. Elves were supposed to be an egalitarian race, free from material desires and devoid of hierarchical distinctions. Even the elf queen had no right to oppress other elves arbitrarily, and no elf should have ever been cast out of the elven forest for any reason. Not even an elf without a surname. Cocotte stood behind Leon, gazing at her tenderly. "In the name of Yade, I will grant you the respect you deserve." Previously, Cocotte had no intention of returning to the elven forest. But now, for Leon, for her kin who had been unjustly marginalized, Cocotte was willing to go back and seek justice for her. She released her hands from Leon's shoulders and leapt from the clouds, landing barefoot on the grass. Leon, still dazed, stared blankly at Cocotte before her. She watched as Cocotte walked barefoot across the grass, thick natural energy swirling at her feet. Wherever she passed, the soil would gently rise, and soon, countless flowers would bud, thriving and growing. With each step, a flower would bloom, exuding an exotic fragrance. She resembled a dancing elf under the moonlight, moving freely across the vast grassland. The flowers responded to her call, spreading outward, emerging from the grass. The will of nature shall manifest from the earth. Elvish. As her words fell, a brilliant green light burst forth from the ground, swirling around Cocotte. The void that connects worlds watches over us under the full moon. Elvish. The green energy gradually converged, and a massive gateway began to take shape amidst the radiance, scattering countless petals as it formed clusters of flowers encircling Cocotte. On the gateway, a benevolent woman seemed to be engraved, holding a bouquet of flowers in her hands, her gaze lowered, her expression serene. Completely surrounded by flowers, Cocotte turned to glance at Victor. "Victor, lend me a hand." As soon as she spoke, Viga's eyes flashed with a cerulean hue. Victor and Viga's magic had long been linked, glowing in unison with a blue light. Connection established. In an instant, an overwhelming surge of magic erupted from Victor, like ocean waves rising dozens of feet high. The petals across the grassland were swept up, and the multicolored tidal wind surged toward Victor in a massive wave. As it reached the flowers surrounding Cocotte, the plants around her grew even more robust, flourishing wildly. From the entire grassland, towering trees shot up dramatically, as if piercing through the thin night sky. Leon stared at the towering trees rising from the ground, a sense of familiarity stirring within her, leaving her in awe. This is the Yade sacred tree? The souls beneath the sky, the forest shall provide you with sanctuary. Elvish. At that moment, Cocotte slowly opened her eyes, her hands clasped in prayer before her chest. Nature's grace. Boomer. A dense wave of natural energy surged forth, distorting the countless runes around the gateway. Dozens of patterns intertwined, forming a glowing network. At the center of it all, the engraved woman lifted her head, opening her eyes as well, raising the bouquet in her hands. She herself gradually dissipated into petals. A colossal cerulean tree rose amidst the blooming clusters of flowers, breaking through the vibrant waves of petals and reaching for the heavens. Its crown was vast and sprawling, extending hundreds of thick branches that covered the surrounding area entirely. 6 differently colored lanterns hung from its branches, of which red, green, and white were already lit. The trunk was covered with countless runes and the magical patterns, with surging magical energy flowing through them. Layers of faint blue light shimmered across the surface of the trunk, mesmerizingly beautiful. Blue leaves began to grow, resembling translucent amber, their mysterious allure illuminated by the moonlight. Its deep roots embedded into the earth, as if anchoring themselves to the world's core. A blue pathway seemed to extend toward the bright moon, ethereal and dreamlike. After completing all this, Cocotte wiped non-existent sweat from her forehead. Phew, that it was exhausting. I really worked hard this time. Then she let herself fall backward from the treetop, plummeting toward the ground. With a whoosh, a cloud darted forward, catching Cocotte as she fell and holding her securely. This is the reflection of the Yade sacred tree connecting to reality. We can directly reach the Yade sacred tree from here. Lying on the cloud, Cocotte added with a hint of pride, "Hee, this is something only a queen can do." Victor's gaze gradually returned to normal as the crow flapped its wings, the blue in its eyes fading away. He walked over to Leon, patting her on the shoulder. Leon, too stunned to move, stared with her mouth agape, her pupils dilated. "Let's go. Let's teach those who bullied and humiliated you a lesson." Confidence gleamed in Victor's eyes, and his tone carried a hint of arrogance, as if he were declaring to the world, "Tell them you're one of the Cravina family." "Your surname Isa Cravina." Leon placed her hand over her chest. The words Victor spoke made her heart tremble slightly. A surname. To the elves, a surname was an incredibly significant matter. It determined an elf's duty and identity. Yet Leon herself had no surname. As the head of the household, Victor possessed the authority to bestow a surname upon others, or something entirely different from the elves, who could only wait for the sacred tree to grant them one. In a human society, nobles had the power to do so. Leon lowered her head, her mind replaying the name Cravina. This was something even Miss Leah could not grant her. Before this moment, Leon and Victor were not well acquainted. They had only met a few times. Although these encounters were few, each one left a deep impression on her. Even so, Leon's impression of Victor was far from favorable. At least, the things he had done were not enough to change the terrible image Victor had left in her mind since childhood. But why? Victor, with his hands in his pockets, glanced back at Leon without offering much explanation. "If you still have doubts, you can ask Leo after we return." Then, he turned his back to her, facing the glowing blue passage ahead. "But for now, I want you to carry the surname I've given you." As he stepped onto the towering runic tree, blue ripples spread out beneath his feet, resembling a cerulean lake suspended in midair. A bright white moon hung high in the night sky, its light illuminating the lake's surface, which sparkled like stars. The fierce wind tugged at Victor's black coat, causing it to billow wildly under the moonlight. "And then, follow me." As his words fell, Victor extended a hand, and Cocotte immediately floated upward. Reaching out, he grabbed her by the collar and lifted her. This lazy elf lived up to her reputation. Even in such a short time, she had managed to fall asleep. Being lifted like this finally woke her up. Blinking her eyes, she realized she was inexplicably floating and looked around in confusion. "Huh? Aren't we at the Elven Forest yet?" Victor looked down at Cocotte and gave her a glance. "Almost there." Tracing along as you rail across the lake, Victor, along with Cocotte, disappeared into the deep blue passage. The white cloud hurriedly followed behind him, slipping inside as well. Only Leon remained, raising her head to gaze at the mysterious blue passage, her emotions a tangled mess. Her golden hair danced wildly in the wind, each strand distinct and free. Family. To her, the word felt far too distant. Even though Leah had given her a name, she had never dared to dream of becoming family with Leah. In Leon's eyes, Leah was like an untouchable star, dazzling beyond reach. She was her white moonlight, the one she had vowed to protect for a lifetime. Leon placed her hand over her chest and took a deep breath. "I shall live for the name you have bestowed upon me." Her gaze grew resolute as she stepped onto the rippling blue lake. With each determined step, she entered the deep blue tunnel, her movements heavy yet unwavering. As the three figures disappeared, the surroundings gradually calmed. The raging wind subsided, leaving only the reflection of a colossal sacred tree, its silver radiance piercing the heavens and spilling light across the land. The blue lake's edges shimmered with countless stars, its rippling surface slowly settling into tranquility. The Elven Forest. Towering trees with lush canopies rose from the verdant grasslands, their dense foliage gradually obscuring the golden sunlight. The beams that filtered through danced with flower petals in the air. Morning dew sparkled like tiny gems, clinging to leaves and grass blades. Even the gray stones glistened with moisture, while flowers peeked out from crevices. A pair of curious sapphire-like eyes peered intently at a blooming flower. When the petals finally unfurled, the owner of those eyes, a young elf with a delicate face and golden hair tied higher, emerged from the underbrush, her pointed ears twitching with delight. She plucked the newly bloomed flower and placed it into a woven basket. Turning around, she saw countless other elves with similarly pointed ears frolicking in the forest. Some hung upside down from branches, sipping dew, while others climbed high into the treetops to gather fruit. A few lazy ones hid behind rocks or nestled among wildflowers, dozing off without a care. Even when spotted, they remained unbothered. Suddenly, an elf picking fruit called out to the others, "That's enough." At her command, even the sleeping elves stirred. Those collecting dew descended to the ground, and all of them moved in unison through the forest, heading toward an open clearing. As the golden sunlight poured down, an enormous sacred tree, adorned with silvery starlight, stood majestically at the center of the land, its roots sprawling across miles like a vast network of life. The tree's trunk shimmered with silvery stars, delicate and elegant, resembling a galaxy adorning its branches. The faint glow of starlight flickered like celestial bodies in the night sky. No one uttered another word. They all knelt reverently before the sacred tree, beginning their morning prayers. Their tender voices rose and fell in a language incomprehensible to outsiders to a sacred tradition of the elves, offering gratitude to the spirit of nature after each harvest. The sacred tree seemed to respond to their prayers, its leaves swaying gently in the breeze and scattering specks of silver light. The colossal trunk, stretching for miles, appeared to be wrapped in a river of stars, its silvery glow flowing downward toward its roots. Beneath this silvery veil, a group of elven guards stood vigil at the tree's base, clad in wooden armor and wielding silver-tipped spears. Their expressions were solemn and unwavering. After a while, a single elf descended gracefully from above. She wore a pristine white gown, a crown of woven grass emitting a soft green glow atop her head. In her hand, she held a wooden staff, her expression serene and composed. Stepping lightly on falling green leaves, she landed steadily on the ground. The guards, upon seeing her, bowed respectfully. "Greetings, High Priestess." The elven High Priestess Avinia Jektla. The Jektla lineage had served as guardians of the Yade sacred tree for generations. The High Priestess's duty was to constantly inspect the sacred tree, ensuring that any potential threats to their mother would be swiftly eradicated. Vinia smiled warmly, nodding and greeting each guard in turn. Her smile filled the guards' hearts with warmth. Despite her esteemed status, the High Priestess treated them with kindness and equality. Yet in truth, Vinia's mind harbored a starkly different sentiment. Fools! Do you really think my smile means I regard you as equals? My surname is one of noble priests. You're nothing more than guards. With the queen absent, I am the most exalted elf among us. Vinia was clever enough to hide her true thoughts. Maintaining her smile, she approached the sacred tree, her staff in hand. Looking up, she gazed at the towering trunk that pierced the heavens, breaking through the clouds. "O Yade sacred tree, grant me the vision to perceive and eliminate all dangers beyond your sanctity." With her prayer, Vinia planted the staff into the ground. Green starlight emanated from the staff, rippling outward in waves that climbed the sacred tree, illuminating its massive trunk with a gentle glow. After several waves of inspection, the staff's light gradually dimmed. As always, the High Priestess sensed no abnormalities within the sacred tree. Her daily task complete, Vinia prepared to leave. Just as she turned to depart, a guard suddenly spoke up. "High Priestess, when will our queen return?" Vinia turned toward the voice, her lips parting slightly as she lowered her gaze to the guard. Her eyes narrowed in a kind smile, and a gentle aura radiated from her. "Do not worry. The sacred tree will always protect us." Though these were her words, Vinia's inner thoughts remained calm and detached. The queen? She abandoned us long ago. Vinia firmly believed that even without Kokot, the Yade sacred tree would never allow the elves to perish. After all, elves were born from the sacred tree. In the end, it would undoubtedly choose another elf to become queen for the sake of their race's survival. Vinia awaited that day, the day she could serve a new, unknown queen. That belief never wavered. However, not all elves shared her wisdom. Thus, she needed to constantly reassure these simpletons, keeping their hope alive and their spirit bright as they awaited the future. "The queen's return is inevitable. We need only be patient." She clasped her hands over her chest, then extended them outward as if embracing the sacred tree, her eyes filled with fervent anticipation. The guards, witnessing the High Priestess's sacred posture, gazed at her with reverence. Vinia basked in their admiration, secretly relishing the moment. But suddenly, a tremor spread through the ground, shaking the base of the sacred tree violently. Vinia abandoned her composure, scanning her surroundings in confusion. "What's happening?" Out of nowhere, 3 ethereal shadows transformed into beams of light, merging with the sacred tree. A storm erupted, the sun turning a fiery red gold, while the vegetation at their feet began to grow wildly. Throughout the elven forest, every elf sensed the disturbance and stopped what they were doing, turning their gazes toward the sacred tree. For a fleeting moment, they seemed to see something. A long, white shadow gliding through the clouds above. As the land erupted with golden sunlight, storms, and untamed growth. A profound awe gripped their hearts. Kneeling once more toward the sacred tree, they felt an overwhelming urge to worship. The same awe crept into Vinia's heart. Despite her experience, she immediately recognized the source of this power. A calamity. Suddenly, a small, pristine hand tapped Vinia's shoulder. Snapping out of her daze, she shifted her gaze downward from the sacred tree. It was an elf, sitting atop a fluffy white cloud, her back to the sacred tree. Golden light radiated from her, a halo of brilliance surrounding her figure, making her appear divinely sacred. "Hey, Vinia. So, you were really looking forward to my return, huh?" The moment they saw the elf sitting atop the cloud, all the other elves froze in place. Even Vinia was no exception. Her expression stiffened for a few seconds before she reacted as though she had seen something utterly unbelievable, her face showing a look of sheer shock. "Cocotte," as her voice echoed. The elven guards felt as if the world itself had collapsed, their hearts shaken to the core. But this emotion quickly transformed into excitement and joy. Heavy breaths of exhilaration and ecstatic cheers mingled together in that instant. "The Elf Queen, Her Majesty has returned? Am I dreaming? Oh my goodness, the High Priestess truly has divine foresight." She said the Queen would return, and she actually did. "I must inform all our kin of this." The guards, overwhelmed with excitement, abandoned their posts and rushed off to spread the news of the Elf Queen's return to every corner of the Forest of Elves. "Hey, Eula Broken Bar!" Vinia reached out, trying to stop them, but the elven guards, lost in their euphoria, completely ignored her. They paid no heed to Vinia's outstretched hand and disappeared in a flash. Weapons were scattered all over the ground, and even their wooden armor was discarded as if it were a hindrance. Only one guard lagged behind. She noticed Vinia's hand still hovering midair, hurriedly stepped forward, and clasped it tightly, her voice trembling with excitement. "High Priestess, thank you so much. It was you who summoned Her Majesty back to us." Before Vinia could even process what was happening, the guard had already dashed off. Watching her kinselation, Cocotte, seated on her cloud, placed her hands on her hips and threw her head back in laughter. "Ha ha ha, it seems I'm still quite revered." Vinia awkwardly withdrew her hand, forcing a smile before turning to Cocotte with a calm gaze. "Cocotte, didn't you once say you would never return?" Cocotte shrugged helplessly and shook her head. "I didn't want to come back either, Buta Broken Bar." She turned slightly, glancing behind her. Vinia's gaze followed Cocotte's line of sight, landing on a figure cloaked in a hood and wearing a mask to conceal their face. Unable to discern the figure's identity, Vinia squinted her eyes, her cold voice filled with suspicion. "You brought a human here?" Cocotte yelled. "Even if you are the Queen of Elves, you shouldn't have brought a human into the Forest of Elves." Cocotte raised an eyebrow, her tone laced with mockery as she smirked. "Who told you she's a human?" Vinia froze in surprise, and Cocotte suddenly called out, "Leon!" At her words, the mysterious figure behind her seemed to receive a command. The figure reached out, pulling back their hood and removing the mask that covered their face. Revealed were long, pointed ears and a cold, strikingly beautiful face. Like a shard of ice, her demeanor exuded an aura that kept others at a distance. Vinia blinked in astonishment as she looked at Leon. "She's a Broken Bar, an elf?" Stepping closer to Leon, Vinia bent slightly to scrutinize her features more closely. "My Broken Bar, there's something familiar about you. Feels like I've seen you somewhere before." Vinia assumed that Leon was one of the elves who had left the Forest of Elves to search for Cocotte and had successfully brought her back. After all, Cocotte's return to the Forest of Elves was now a reality. With a smile on her face, Vinia kindly asked Leon, "My kin, please tell me your surname." She had already heard Leon's name from Cocotte, though Vinia found the name somewhat peculiar. It didn't quite fit the naming style of elves. Despite her doubts, Vinia maintained her smile, meeting Leon's cold gaze. But all she got in return was a faint scoff from the elf before her. "Kin." Hearing that word again, Leon couldn't help but find it particularly ironic. The scoff left Vinia momentarily stunned. Leon slowly closed her eyes, recalling the words Victor had once said to her. When she reopened her eyes, Her emerald green gaze locked with Vinya's. Kravina. Remember my surname. A broken bar. Inside the Yade sacred tree was an extraordinarily vast internal space. The natural energy within was immensely concentrated, like a massive reservoir brimming with abundant power. Numerous branching pathways connected the spaces, forming a labyrinthine structure. Vega fluttered its wings, flitting through the space. Incredible. So this is the Yade sacred tree that nurtures elves. Its interior is like this. All right, Victor, tell me your plan. Landing on Victor's shoulder, it began chirping noisily. I know you must have a purpose for coming here, so stop keeping me in the dark. Victor paid no attention to Vega, instead choosing a path and continuing forward. He didn't even hesitate about getting lost in this labyrinthine space. Vega wasn't surprised. It seemed as though there was no place in this world Victor hadn't been to. He always appeared to be familiar with every terrain, even the intricate forest of elves. As he navigated the tree's interior, Victor moved with ease. At every fork in the path, he didn't need to think twice before choosing the correct direction. As he traversed the maze, a dense aura of calamity emanated from him. The white runes on his coat flickered continuously, a gentle breeze swirling around him as the patterns gradually illuminated the entire fabric. Did you know? The Yade sacred tree is a colossal intelligent life form. Victor spoke lightly as he continued deeper into the tree. Its interior is akin to a human body, equipped with various defensive mechanisms. To the sacred tree, any intruder is akin to a virus. As he walked, several peculiar branches rose before him, blocking his path. These branches were pure energy forms, soft and unstable, their shapes highly distorted. They seemed to scrutinize Victor, then swayed toward the hem of his coat before retreating to the sides, signaling him to proceed. Watching the branches move aside, Victor resumed his explanation to Vega. Like this, they automatically block and eliminate intruders. However, Victor, imbued with the power of calamity, was like a harbinger of disaster. To the sacred tree, he didn't even qualify as human. In the game, the Yade sacred tree was a high-level map for late-stage players. It required a large team of players to cooperate and reach the depths of the map. The enemies players faced were these defensive mechanisms within the tree. Vega listened quietly as Victor explained. As Victor pressed forward, he continued speaking. Do you know why the sacred tree protects and nurtures elves? Vega flapped its wings, almost understanding Victor's point. I knew it. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Soon, the scene before them confirmed the reason behind Victor's words. After passing through a narrow, dark passage, the surroundings transformed dramatically. The vast space was filled with various towering waterfalls and jagged rocks of all shapes, resembling another realm. Above, countless branches intertwined, obscuring something from view. Dense natural energy, like a vast ocean, poured into the land below. Following the branches, Vega saw a transparent green heart, crystalline and pulsating in midair. Each beat caused the space to tremble, the deep sound resonating in the ears of both Victor and the crow. We're here. This is their heart of the Yade sacred tree. Infinite natural energy flowed through the slender branches into the massive heart, providing it with immense power. Watching the scene unfold, Victor stood with his hands in his pockets and spoke. Everyone believes that the elves' talents and authority are gifts from the sacred tree, including the sacred tree's bestowed surname. Elves naively think that receiving the surname from the sacred tree grants them the power associated with that name. Even the most ordinary elf can leap to the pinnacle of talent upon being given the Yade name. They're wrong. The Yade sacred tree creates elves with natural energy, and the elves return this energy to the sacred tree, creating a continuous cycle. During this process, the sacred tree identifies the most exceptional elf and bestows upon her the title of queen. The queen sacrifices her talents, using her bloodline as a blueprint for the sacred tree to create even stronger elves. When the queen dies, the sacred tree selects a new elf to become the queen. In this virtuous cycle, the elves grow increasingly powerful, and the energy the sacred tree receives becomes purer and more abundant. User. It's not the Yade surname that makes one the elf queen. Rather, before being given the surname Mia, she is the only one who can become the queen. Victor calmly looked up at the massive heart of the sacred tree, its rhythmic beating echoing in the space. Suddenly, His aura surged, and a terrifying power coursed through his body. The Yade sacred tree has been nourished for too long. So, with his hands still in his pockets, Victor's coat began to glow with tricolored patterns that crept up to his face. The phantom forms of 3 enormous beasts emerged behind him, their veins and the markings clearly visible. Thumper thumper. The heart beat faster and faster, as if sensing an imminent danger. Above the heart, an exceptionally long health bar appeared. Stretching hundreds of meters, its end was out of sight. Yade. AALV 60. The wind roared, and Victor's coat billowed wildly. A suffocating, oppressive aura erupted. Staring at the seemingly endless health bar, Victor's calm voice resonated coldly. "That which belongs to my family. It's time you returned it." As the battle began, the Yade divine tree seemed to sense the imminent danger. The surrounding vines trembled, and sharp spikes formed from natural energy gradually emerged from the intricate branches. The wooden walls of the vast space were covered in lush green weeds. Leaves, glowing with a vibrant green hue, fluttered down from the sky, settling onto the walls embedded with grass. From the thick wooden walls emanated several terrifying auras. The grass began to shed, and the leaves scattered in the air. Green light fused into the walls, and a figure slowly emerged from the lush growth. The creature was entirely green, its body wrapped in soul-like luminous green leaves, with clear textures visible. Only its eyes shone with a piercing white light. In its hand, it held a circular blade, with a horrifying eye at its center, glaring at the intruders within the divine tree. Level 45. Green Ivy Guardian. Victor Cravina glanced at the creature without any visible reaction. Its appearance signified that the heart of the divine tree had realized it was in danger. The Yade divine tree itself lacked offensive capabilities, but it possessed an extremely troublesome defense mechanism. It would summon monsters of the same level as those present, based on the number of individuals in the area. Thus, when facing the Yade divine tree, even in a team, one must consider the number of participants to avoid summoning an overwhelming number of monsters. However, Victor had long devised a countermeasure for this. He channeled the power of the wood calamity within him, and green patterns began to dominate, spreading across his coat. The wild grass beneath his feet gradually withered, replaced by a vast expanse of green sprouts emerging from the soil. Breaking through the damp black earth, the sprouts twisted and grew. These green shoots burst through their shells, their bodies thickening and growing robust at a speed visible to the naked eye. Lush branches extended, and dense foliage emerged. The tree continued to grow until it reached the upper layers of the entire space, where it finally stopped. But then, flower buds began to grow wildly at the base of the tree, climbing up its thick trunk. 2 flower buds, supported by green vines, carved deep grooves into the sturdy trunk as they continued to ascend toward the canopy. The flower buds grew larger and taller until they hung from the massive tree's branches. The flowers seemed to swell as if something was forcing them open, and they suddenly burst into full bloom. From within, several green monsters burst forth, armed with sharp pincers or sturdy shells, standing against the monsters summoned by the heart of the divine tree. The flower buds atop the canopy showed no signs of stopping, repeatedly opening and closing, releasing wave after wave of monsters. Meanwhile, the heart of the Yade divine tree, unwilling to relent, sensed the approaching danger, and its heartbeat quickened. On the green walls, countless green ivy guardians, armed with blades, continuously appeared. The guardians' blades spun and slashed, severing the smaller monsters in half. They then used the leaves on their bodies to whip up storms, scattering the attacking monsters. Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, remaining calm even as the monsters he summoned were suppressed. The Yade divine tree has been nourished by generations of elves, its energy refined over countless years into the purest form of natural energy. Thus, Victor needed to deplete part of its energy first by exploiting its summoning mechanism. The more monsters Victor summoned, the harder it would be for the divine tree to focus on him. It required a continuous summoning of an equivalent number of guardians to ensure its safety. Soon, the soil beneath the ground suddenly gave way to several massive man-eating flowers. They burst through the earth, devouring countless green ivy guardians in one gulp, releasing thick sap within their floral mouths. Whenever a green ivy guardian was destroyed, the divine tree would summon another to replace it. Its energy seemed endless. The heart throbbed powerfully, thump, thump. Only the level 45 green ivy guardian remained motionless. It had been summoned to match Victor's level and was meant to confront him. However, Victor made no moves, and the Jade divine tree struggled to identify Victor as an enemy. The overwhelming power of the calamity shrouded Victor, making it impossible for the divine tree to perceive him as human. The heart thumped rhythmically, its summoning triggered solely by the sensed threat. Victor observed the pulsating heart, a peculiar thought crossing his mind. Vega, how does your magic compare to this? You want me to compete with it? Ha ha ha. Upon hearing Victor's question, Vega let out a sinister laugh. The next moment, a terrifying black wind swept through the towering canopy, engulfing Vega completely. The shadow of the crow stretched unnaturally thin until it covered the entire space, climbing onto the densely packed sharp branches. Even the pulsating heart glowed green under the darkness. Its once sharp and sinister voice turned deep and chaotic, like an ominous melody echoing from the void, ethereal and deeply unsettling. Victor, I never imagined you'd compare a god to a tree. How could I possibly lose? Victor, hands still in his pockets, replied calmly, that's all I needed to hear. In an instant, their eyes glowed blue, and a subtle connection formed between them. Intertwining and merging, they established a magical bridge. Magic value, // At that moment, an overwhelming surge of magic erupted from Victor's body. His coat fluttered wildly under the immense pressure of the wind, while the tempest lashed out like a whip, bending every branch until it seemed they might snap. Victor stroked his chin thoughtfully. Which one should I use? Finally, he made his decision. Lowering his gaze, he glanced at his mana bar. // Vega sensed something amiss, feeling his body grow weaker. He sharply turned to Victor. Wait, Victor, what are you doing? In mere seconds, the mana had decreased significantly. Victor glanced at his mana bar. The consumption rate was astonishingly fast. But this was all within his expectations. The boundless sea of magic was no longer restrained, bursting forth and spreading in all directions. The dense blue aura even took on a physical form, resembling a tangible ocean that engulfed everything around it. The oppressive magic was so overwhelming that even the massive heart felt pressured, its beats turning rapid and stifled. At last, it recognized Victor as a threat, and the level 45 green ivy guardian finally moved. Under the crushing magic sea, it struggled to advance. Even when it forced its body forward, it was immediately swept away by the terrifying magic. The green ivy guardian could only spin its blade, with fearsome green energy coiling around it as it rotated at high speed. The spinning green rings began to whirl rapidly. It hurled the blade, the rings cutting through the dense magic sea, straining to reach Victor. But just as they were about to touch him, the attack shattered instantly. Surrounded by this overwhelming magic, Victor was perfectly protected. Suddenly, massive waves surged from the ocean, swallowing the monsters birthed from the giant flower buds. The magic continued pouring from Victor's body, like a massive floodgate, raising the sea level higher and higher. Magic engulfed the entire Jade divine tree, even erupting from its intricate branches. It was as if a real ocean was invading the divine tree from within, spilling outward. Blue magic surged from the tree's hollows, crashing to the ground and entwining the divine tree. The terrifying magic spread across a 30-mile radius, drowning everything. Beneath the divine tree, Vinia and Cocotte clearly sensed something, simultaneously looking up. Vinia's expression turned solemn. She watched as the blue magic ocean crashed down from the sky, creating waves over 30 feet high before gradually dissipating. Seeing this, Vinia took a few steps back, her grip on her staff trembling with unease. The divine tree. Why is this happening? What on earth is going on? Cocotte, however, squinted her eyes, seemingly enjoying the overwhelming magic. My, no matter when, this feeling never changes. This magic. It's so powerful it doesn't even feel like it belongs to a mage. Vinia abruptly turned to Cocotte, shouting, Cocotte, tell me, What does Cravina mean? She was still fixated on the issue of Leon's surname. The Yade Divine Tree had never bestowed the surname Cravina upon any elf. No elf bore the surname Cravina. Now, staring at Cocotte, who clearly knew something, Vinia felt a deep sense of foreboding. The Divine Tree's anomaly might be connected to Cravina. Hearing Vinia's question, Cocotte crossed her arms and turned away. Cravina? Vinia, sometimes I really think you should visit the human world. If you went to the human world, you'd understand a lot more. Vinia didn't believe Cocotte's words. Clutching her staff, she spoke with arrogance. I am the most esteemed high priestess of the elves. Everything I have comes from the Yade Divine Tree. How could I, like you, forget the nurturing of the Divine Tree and flee from the elven forest? Cocotte glanced at her helplessly and sighed. I've never acknowledged that the Divine Tree nurtured me. Enough talk, Cocotte. Tell me, what does Cravina represent? Cocotte listened to her outburst and smiled faintly. Cravina represents a family, and its head is my boss. Cocotte cast a pitying glance at Vinia, as if reminiscing, her tone calm and indifferent. A bastard of a mage who would never turn his back on his family or subordinates. Vinia stood frozen in place, utterly stunned by Cocotte's words. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she stared at Cocotte. She quickly turned to Leon, her voice trembling as she asked, your surname was given to you by a human? Why, my kin? Have you also abandoned the Divine Tree? Vinia's voice carried both accusation and confusion, but Leon turned back to her, his gaze icy cold as he replied in an indifferent tone, it was the Divine Tree and all you who abandoned me first. Vinia was dumbfounded, unable to comprehend the meaning behind Leon's words. But in her daze, her eyes suddenly widened, and she slowly raised a hand, as if wanting to touch Leon's cheek. You are the elf without a surname? How could this be? This must have been the most surreal day for Vinia. The long-lost elf queen had returned to the forest of elves, bringing with her the elf who bore no surname. Moreover, their return had caused a disturbance in the Yade Divine Tree. Vinia couldn't help but connect the current state of the Yade Divine Tree with Cocotte. As if realizing something, she snapped back to her senses and looked at Cocotte. What did you just say? The head of the Cravina family is your boss? Cocotte nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Vinia's pupils quivered as she stared at Cocotte's face in bewilderment. Cocotte Yade, do you even realize what you're saying? You are the queen, the most noble existence among the elves. And yet, you chose to follow a human. Cocotte sighed softly and replied with a calm demeanor, I never said I wanted to be this queen. If the Yade Divine Tree is truly omnipotent, why doesn't it create elves on its own? Why does it need an elf queen? Her words, laden with doubt, echoed in Vinia's mind. Vinia blinked in confusion and raised her head to look at the Divine Tree. Why couldn't the Divine Tree create elves on its own? Why did it need an elf queen? Why, after the elf queen had left for so long, had the Divine Tree not chosen another elf to bestow a surname upon? These questions suddenly flashed through her mind, each one striking her heart like a heavy blow. No, no. Vinia clutched her head, as if something had tampered with her thoughts, forcing her to consider these questions. She raised her head to look at Cocotte, her face filled with fear. What have you done to me? Just a little something to quiet you down. You talk too much, Cocotte said, spreading her hands and shrugging her shoulders. She continued, since you've already thought about these things, why not keep thinking? What are you blindly worshipping? Vinia gritted her teeth, covering one eye as she shouted, the Divine Tree is sacred. It is omnipotent. Wrong. Cocotte looked at Vinia seriously and immediately refuted her with a calm tone. It is not omnipotent. It is because of you, because of me, because of the existence of other elves that it seems omnipotent. Vinia opened her mouth, unable to accept this. But we were created by the Divine Tree. We are protected by the Divine Tree. We are free. We live as we please. Do you really live as you please? Cocotte crossed her arms, her gaze gradually becoming stern, sweeping away her previously lazy demeanor. Vinia froze for a moment, listening to Cocotte continue. Protecting the Divine Tree, using the authority granted by it, generation after generation. Have you never grown tired of this repetitive life? Vinia stubbornly retorted, We are protected by the divine tree. It is only right for us to serve it. The one protecting you is yourself, is nature itself. Cocotte shouted, a surge of intense natural energy swirling around her. The energy left Vinia stunned, staring blankly at Cocotte as she raised a hand. In Vinia's dazed gaze, Cocotte spoke softly. Do you see? We never needed the protection of the divine tree. On the contrary, the divine tree has protected you too well. It has made you forget that even without the divine tree, you can rely on yourselves, just like me. Power surged like a fountain from her hand, transforming into small, mystical spirits. Watching this scene, Vinia's staff slipped from her hand and fell to the ground, as if she were questioning her entire existence. Just as Cocotte had said, this was something no other elf could do. Under the divine tree's protection, the elves had long forgotten what it meant to face a crisis. They didn't need natural energy to protect themselves, for nature itself would protect them. The elves could produce this energy, but they couldn't control it. Except for Cocotte. She seemed to be a higher being among the elves, able to wield her power as she pleased. Because she was the elf queen? At that moment, Vinia's eyes widened. As if grasping at the last straw, she tried to refute Cocotte's argument. Because you are the elf queen. You were given a surname by the divine tree. That's why you can. But even so, she had lost her confidence, her words stumbling. Cocotte shook her head, delivering the final blow. If everything is as you say, then why does Leon have no surname? This statement left Vinia completely speechless. The divine tree granted surnames to all elves, giving them authority and power. If it truly had this ability, why would there be an elf without a surname among their kind? Vinia looked at Cocotte in disbelief. How did you discover? No, why would you think this way? Cocotte touched her chin, closing her eyes. Ha ha, well. In a daze, she recalled Victor's words in her mind. Raise the elves, keep them happy, and the natural energy they produce can be used as an energy source. But you don't need that. The divine tree is always external. Even without the divine tree, you are still the queen among the elves. The recollection ended, and Cocotte opened her eyes again, scratching the back of her head with a laugh. How should I put it? Although someone gave me a hint, of course I also relied on my own wisdom to deduce it. In any case, I'm not telling you all this to make you understand me. Cocotte spoke as she looked at the completely disoriented Vinia. This time, I've returned for two reasons. One is for her. Cocotte glanced back at Leon. And the other. She looked at the gathering crowd of elves and said calmly, I'm here to resign. As if waiting for this moment, Cocotte looked at the countless elves who had arrived, filling the area around the divine tree like a vast sea of heads. These elves had rushed over upon hearing news of the elf queen's return. At this moment, they heard Cocotte's words. All of them raised their heads, staring blankly at the queen they revered. What did the queen just say? She said she doesn't want to be the elf queen anymore. Why? Did she betray the divine tree? At this moment, the elves' eyes grew lifeless, just like Vinia's earlier. They couldn't accept it. Vinia snapped out of her daze, her heart trembling as she saw the gathered elves. Damn it! When did these fools get here? Vinia knew very well that she herself could barely accept Cocotte's reasoning. These fools, their minds filled with the idea of surnames bestowed by the divine tree. How could they possibly accept Cocotte's theory? Thinking of this, Vinia shouted in an attempt to salvage the situation. Cocotte yelled. Do you even know what you're saying? It was the divine tree that gave you life. The divine tree that gave you power. How can you abandon this surname, this identity? The divine tree will never allow it. Vinia's words had the desired effect. The elves began to regain their composure, their eyes clearing up. They started chattering among themselves. That's right, the queen's surname was given by the divine tree. She has no reason to abandon it. The queen is also an elf. She can't refuse the divine tree, she can't leave it. Don't worry, everyone. The queen will never abandon us. In just a few sentences, Vinia managed to rally the elves, restoring their spirits. She appeared calm, like a stern and unyielding high priest. But inside, she was in utter chaos, like a dam on the verge of collapse. Kokot's words had already shattered her mental defenses. If Kokot were to say a few more words in front of these fools, they wouldn't just question her, it could escalate into a revolt. What would happen to the entire forest of elves then? Vinia didn't dare to imagine. But Kokot seemed intent on provoking them. The divine tree gave us life. Ha ha, how amusing. Kokot placed her hands on her hips, looking down at the elves below. Her calm gaze carried a hint of sorrow. The ones who gave you life here, was it not me? Was it not the previous elf queens? Her words, accompanied by a surge of natural energy, spread throughout the area, silencing all the elves, even Vinia, for she had been created during the reign of the previous elf queen. Kokot, with an air of arrogance, chuckled softly. As for whether the Yade divine tree will allow it, let me tell you it absolutely will. The elves could no longer utter a word, their minds filled with a single question: why? Suddenly, a terrifying roar shook the ground, emanating from within the Yade divine tree and echoing across the sky, piercing everyone's ears. The high-pitched and oppressive sound made every elf's ears ache. Along with the roar, the golden sun in the sky suddenly grew brighter, unbearably scorching, enveloped in a crimson hue. The intense heat and waves of fire spread out completely. The massive trunk of the divine tree seemed engulfed in flames. This familiar yet terrifying presence made every elf feel an overwhelming urge to kneel. Vinia stared blankly at the divine tree, as if witnessing an unbelievable sight. She muttered a name in fear: the calamity of fire. Within the Yade divine tree, Victor stared at the status panel floating before him. Victor Kravina, LV45 HP, //MP, 1 // Thank you, Vega. Your power was not wasted. The crow lay slumped on his shoulder, its once pitch-black feathers now tinged with gray, as if completely drained, unable to utter a single word. Victor raised his head, gazing forward. A monstrous beast stood amidst the fire-engulfed area. Its body was entirely crimson, its eyes glowing yellow, and it was covered in flames and molten lava. Under the fragmented red sky, black embers floated with sparks of fire, and the scorching heat distorted everything around. The smell of burning filled Victor's nostrils, but it didn't suffocate him. On the contrary, he breathed it in with great satisfaction. The true calamity had descended. You can summon guardians of equivalent power? Now, I'll give you some time. At this moment, the beast's health bar appeared, stretching for miles. LV60A, summon something stronger than it. Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, his coat billowing wildly in the heat wave. He stared at the massive, pulsating heart ahead. With confidence radiating from her words, she spoke leisurely: if you can't do it, you might die. The boundless grasslands were engulfed in flames, with terrifying lava surging from the fractured earth, erupting skyward from the void beneath. In midair, firelight coiled around the colossal beast. The swirling red flames in the sky resembled a frenzied vortex, spinning madly under the crimson clouds. The sky was divided into layers, with the clouds at the very top. There, it wasn't merely crimson, it was as if fury itself had transformed into flames, burning fiercely. Gildan's entire body was covered in molten lava, its sharp, pale white fangs glowing a brilliant red under the endless firelight. Its eyes reflected the terrifying blaze, and two scorching breaths rippled through the space, dimming the once bright green surroundings. Each of Gul'dan's steps caused the ground to quake violently under the immense impact. Cracks spread from beneath the beast's massive feet, with flames slithering like serpents into the earth's core, triggering destructive lava eruptions that shot over 30 feet high. The interior of the sacred tree was scorched by the overwhelming heat, shrinking under the relentless flames that spontaneously ignited its wooden body. The red fury danced ceaselessly. Feeling the terrifying heat, the heart of the sacred tree throbbed intensely. The surrounding guardians, as if commanded, spun their blades at high speed and charged toward Gul'dan. Yet the beast didn't even bother to turn around. Sensing the faint presence of different natural energies, it let out a deep, guttural snort from its nostrils. A massive heat wave burst forth from its back, accompanied by flames, distorting the surrounding space under the intense heat. This sudden burst immobilized the Guardians, freezing them in place. They could only watch helplessly as the incoming firelight and heat wave consumed them entirely. Scorching heat wave. As the white shockwave gradually dissipated, the Guardians, clad in green leaf armor, found their energy shields trembling under the assault. The flames engulfed their bodies, igniting them from within. Like an unquenchable inferno, the merciless flames burned away their final despair. In the end, they turned to ashes, falling to the ground. Their green energy armor shattered completely upon contact with the earth. The flames, along with the ashes, subsided gradually. Gray-black embers swirled upward in the lingering heatwave, merging with the crimson sparks in the air. Molten lava flowed across the ground, covering the entire space. From the cracks in the earth, chunks of lava occasionally erupted, corroding the green branches protecting the heart of the sacred tree. The sacred tree's heart beat faster and faster, its pulsations growing increasingly terrifying. The walls continuously produced batch after batch of green vine guardians, who also spun their blades and attacked Gul'dan. But their fate was identical to the first wave. They didn't even need Gul'dan to act. The sheer oppressive heat caused them to self-combust. To Victor's eyes, the sacred tree couldn't summon any guardians capable of resisting Gul'dan. Soon, the heart's frantic pulsations began to slow, and the production of guardians also decreased. The sacred tree's summoning speed couldn't keep up with the flame's destructive pace, which reduced them to ashes in moments. Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, calmly observing the gradually weakening heart of the Yade sacred tree. With a mocking tone, he remarked, "Is that all you've got? Generations of accumulated natural energy, is this all there is?" The enormous heart of the sacred tree fell silent for a moment after hearing Victor's words. Its pulsations slowed to a stop. But as Gul'dan drew closer, the heart finally stirred again. A torrent of green natural energy surged forth, as if being squeezed out of every vein connected to the heart. The energy flowed like a river, passing through the searing lava and blazing flames, descending into the earth's core. It spread across the entire space, flowing through the sacred tree's countless passages. As the green natural energy was fully released, the once flaming crimson sky took on a faint green hue. Outside the Yade sacred tree, the land trembled under the clash of two forces. The ground cracked, and the tree's roots emerged from the soil. Each root seemed to possess a will of its own, with green energy coursing through them as they struck the loosened earth. The concentrated natural energy gathered once more, forming a green ocean that engulfed all elves, pinning their bodies while leaving only their heads exposed to breathe. Above, the fragmented clouds converged around the sacred tree's crown, spiraling as if drawn by some mysterious force. The sacred tree was now covered in red markings, with molten lava flowing over its bark. Under the darkened sky, crimson stars flickered above the land. The towering crown of the tree was consumed by flames, though the released energy managed to suppress the flickering fire somewhat. The elves looked up at the burning sacred tree, overwhelmed by boundless fear. Their faces turned pale, lips trembled, pupils dilated, and hands shook uncontrollably despite being restrained. As they gradually accepted the grim reality, they lowered their noble heads, clasped to their trembling hands, and began to pray. Vinia also gazed at the towering, flame-consumed sacred tree, her eyes filled with terror. She murmured, "The sacred tree, a broken bar is crying, a broken bar." At some point, Vinia seemed to hear the sorrowful wails of the sacred tree, lingering in her ears. She was drawn to the mournful cries, and in a daze, she seemed to hear the tree lamenting its agony. "Pain, a broken bar, what a broken bar, the burning agony." Vinia raised her head in disbelief. At that moment, she felt the sacred tree's tragic plight. The earth trembled, and the sky was filled with ominous phenomena. Flames spread for miles, enveloping the sacred tree in an inferno. For centuries, the elven forest had been a haven of peace and tranquility. But now, the elves finally experienced what felt like a natural disaster, shattering their spirits. "What's happening inside?" Vinia turned to Kokot, her gaze stern. The sacred tree's turmoil and the forest's catastrophic state were undoubtedly connected to Kokot's sudden return. And that aura of calamity, a broken bar. Why is there the presence of a calamity? Meeting Vinia's gaze, Cocotte shrugged helplessly and replied, "Well, a broken bar." Simply put, you could say there's a calamity inside the sacred tree, tearing the place apart. Her calm words left Vinny utterly stunned. Leon's emerald green eyes also lifted, staring intently at the flame-covered sacred tree. Countless complex thoughts flashed through his mind. A broken bar. Inside the Yade sacred tree. After unleashing its vast energy, the trembling heart seemed to shed a layer of its exterior, gradually transforming. The densest natural energy had been fully extracted, seemingly coalescing into the sacred tree's will. A green heart, like a soul, began to take shape in the air, surrounded by writhing vines and glowing green light. The moment the words fell, Gulden opened its abyssal maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its head tilted back, gazing at the sky as it let out a furious roar. Yet under that deafening roar, the Yade sacred tree did not cower. Around its heart, vines began to writhe and rise slowly. The thorns on those vines spun relentlessly, reaching such a high speed that they formed after images, spinning wildly. Like dozens of sharp, flexible drills, they surged toward Gulden's eyes, blotting out the sky. The gaping maws on the vines aimed to bite deeply into Gulden's body. Such an attack would undoubtedly be effective against ordinary foes. But unfortunately, the opponent it faced was no ordinary enemy. It was the calamity of fire, the purest embodiment of fire energy in this world. Sensing the impending danger, Gulden didn't even bother to evade. It was as though its arrogance had reached its peak, allowing the vines to approach unimpeded. Just as the maws were about to sink into its body, boom! Terrifying magma erupted from Gulden's body, accompanied by towering pillars of fire that shot skyward. Golden molten lava poured over its entire form. The armor of molten rock became even more dazzling, glowing with a golden radiance, as layer upon layer of intricate patterns adorned its body. In that instant, it seemed as though countless ferocious beasts had emerged from Gulden's body, their terrifying presence erupting outward. The sheer pressure was overwhelming, as though it sought to burn everything around it to ashes. Lava stance. When a world boss enters its second phase, even gods would struggle to intervene. The vines pierced through the distorted waves of heat, heading straight for Gulden's face. At this moment, they finally made contact with Gulden's body. They embedded themselves into the molten surface of the calamity of fire, and green energy began to flow through the vines. But almost instantly upon contact, the vines recoiled violently. The maws at their tips were ignited with inextinguishable flames, which traveled along the vines, relentlessly burning toward the heart of the Yade sacred tree. As magma and vines intertwined, it was the magma that emerged victorious. The maws of the vines gathered their remaining green energy and spat it out in a concentrated burst. Gulden's body shuddered as it raised one massive foot and brought it down with a thunderous crash. In an instant, the ground quaked, and a massive wall of molten lava erupted from the earth, rising like a towering barrier to block the green energy. The moment the two forces collided, a deafening explosion echoed across the battlefield, shattering the massive lava wall into fragments. The blinding green light dissipated, revealing Gulden completely unscathed. The calamity of fire slowly raised its magma-covered arm, which radiated an unbearable heat as it hovered in the air before slamming down. The air twisted under the intense heat, and two fiery blades, carrying waves of flame, slashed toward the heart of the sacred tree. The vines intertwined, forming an enormous green shield in front of the heart to resist the fiery blade's assault. Boom! The scorching heat and crimson light exploded outward, sending a wave of searing energy crashing against the heart. The green shield was forcibly melted, leaving a conspicuous hole in its surface. The massive heart throbbed violently, convulsing as it took damage. It was wounded. Watching the health bar of the enormous heart drop slightly, Victor shook his head. He wasn't disdainful. His voice was calm as he spoke the harsh truth. I once defeated an opponent similar to you, but many times stronger. Also born of nature, yet you are far inferior. Clearly, the level 60, 6th tier boss, the Yade sacred tree, couldn't compare to the wood calamity Adruja that Victor had once faced. But then again, Victor suddenly chuckled softly. This time, His laughter carried a hint of contempt toward the sacred tree. The power you've gained from nature's childry in a broken bar. How could it ever compare to nature itself? Hearing Victor's words, the heart seemed to understand something. The vines in the sky ceased their movements. Finally, it began to beat strongly once more. Thumper thumper. Like a great drum, it pounded rhythmically, never stopping. It seemed to be performing some intricate and mysterious ritual. Dense natural energy was summoned, converging from all directions toward the heart of the sacred tree. Victor merely watched silently as it strengthened itself, his hands in his pockets. Still trying to resist, are you? In that case, broken bar. He extended one hand and snapped his fingers. Gildan began to move. It was as if the entire surrounding area had transformed into the interior of a volcano. The space was coated in magma, and the ground trembled violently. Chunks of molten rock began to fall from Gildan's body, landing on the ground and sending up sprays of fiery sparks. The temperature soared rapidly, carrying an aura of destruction that sought to consume everything. Under this terrifying presence, only one man's voice echoed clearly through the space. End it, Gildan! Roar! Exclamation mark. A deafening roar erupted as natural energy surged from the ground and the interior of the sacred tree. Blinding pillars of fire illuminated everything. Scorching heat swept across, engulfing all in its path. A broken bar. Outside the sacred tree, flames and molten lava spewed forth, spilling onto the solid earth below. The raging winds rekindled the flames, which continued to burn the sacred tree. The praying elves watched as the sacred tree writhed in endless agony, their hearts burning with anxiety. Vinia bit her lip, her expression filled with humiliation as she turned to Kokot. Kokot Yade, you are also a member of the elven race. Why are you standing by and watching the Yade sacred tree be destroyed? Kokot looked at Vinia calmly and replied indifferently, destroyed? No, certainly not. This is merely to allow us, the elves, and the sacred tree to be reborn. She raised her head, her gaze sweeping over the elves below. They were still praying, clinging to the faint hope that their prayers might bring salvation. Their hands clenched tightly, as if holding on to fleeting hope. They prayed fervently, unwilling to rise and fight back, unwilling to resist. Vinia couldn't comprehend Kokot's reasoning. She wanted to argue, to refute Kokot's words. But then, the entire Yade sacred tree began to glow with a strange light. The elves' gazes were drawn to it completely. It was as if they had received some mysterious call, their eyes filled with an eerie fervor. One by one, the elves stood upright, and a voice emerged from among them, the sacred tree is in danger. The sacred tree needs us. As those words spread, all the elves seemed to awaken completely, their eyes burning with fanaticism. The sacred tree needs us. The sacred tree needs us. The chant echoed in every elf's ears. Vinia remained one of the few elves who stayed clear-headed. The sacred tree's movements didn't captivate her, nor did the words of her kin sway her. She looked around in shock at the fanatical elves. We're broken bar. What is happening to you all? Kokot crossed her arms and said, still don't understand, Vinia. As the high priestess tasked with protecting the sacred tree for generations, have you never truly understood what the Yade sacred tree is? As she spoke, Kokot raised her arm. In her palm, a faint glow of natural energy drifted toward the interior of the sacred tree. It was being forcibly absorbed by the Yade sacred tree. Kokot clenched her fist, severing the connection between the natural energy and the sacred tree. I can control this power freely, but can you? At that moment, Vinia looked down at her own palm. There, too, a faint green glow was seeping through the crimson flames, drifting toward the sacred tree. And she couldn't stop the energy from leaving her body. She turned to her kin and saw the same faint glow emanating from their bodies, flowing steadily toward the sacred tree. Seeing this, Vinia felt her faith begin to crumble. The Yade sacred tree was forcibly extracting their energy. Elves, born of nature, were inherently pure energy. And if that energy were completely drained at a broken bar, you can imagine the consequences, can't you? Kokot said with a hint of pity as she looked at Vinia and the other elves. Vinia turned back, reaching out as if to stop the elves from approaching the sacred tree. No, stop a broken bar. These fools, so what were they doing? Were they so eager to throw their lives away? But their suicidal resolve couldn't be stopped. From the beginning, The elves had been taught that the sacred tree was above all else. They didn't even realize their actions were leading to their deaths. All they knew was that, in this moment, the sacred tree needed them. They naively believed that saving the sacred tree would restore their lives to normal. Under the sacred tree's protection, the elves had long lost any sense of crisis or independent thought. They even ignored the orders of Vinia, their high priestess, and insisted on moving toward the sacred tree. In Vinia's despairing gaze, bang! A loud gunshot suddenly rang out. Countless elves were drawn to the sound, their fanaticism fading slightly, their eyes regaining some clarity. Beneath the sacred tree, Leon raised one arm, holding a black pistol. The pitch-black barrel was aimed skyward, with white smoke curling from its muzzle. In the next moment, that dark barrel turned to face the elves. Leon's emerald green eyes were devoid of emotion. As he stared at them, a cold voice rang out, "Take one more step forward, a broken bar, and this thing will be aimed at you." The crisp gunshot brought the elves back to their senses as their gaze slowly turned forward. Leon stood coldly at a distance, her gun steadily aimed at them. This completely sobered up the elves. They cowered, their eyes fixed fearfully on the strange black weapon in Leon's hand. Facing her kindred, Leon showed not a shred of mercy in her eyes. Though they were all elves, in her eyes, these elves were like complete strangers with no blood ties. If she wanted to, she wouldn't even blink at shooting an elf dead. Cocotte watched the scene before her and shook her head. Unless it hurts, you really won't wake up. While the elves would follow the seductive commands of the Yade divine tree, at the same time they feared death. Any living creature fears death. The divine tree summoned them with the intention of sending these elves to their deaths. Even if Vinia tried to stop them and directly told them the divine tree's true intentions, these elves probably wouldn't believe it. After all, how could their great divine tree harm them? By the time they faced true death, it would be impossible to escape. Though Vinia was also drawn to the black weapon in Leon's hand, she remained clear-headed now. At this moment, she had countless questions she wanted to get answers to from Cocotte. We were all created by the divine tree. But, why is this happening? She watched helplessly as the natural energy continuously drained from her body, making it gradually become ethereal, yet she was powerless to stop it. If she had truly entered the divine tree's domain, she probably wouldn't even be able to stand steadily now. Understanding Vinia's confusion, Cocotte patiently explained, "Precisely because we were created by the Yade divine tree, it can use us without any burden. Vinia, you all treat the divine tree as a great mother, but it has never seen you as children." Hearing Cocotte's words, Vinia's features scrunched up, unable to accept this. "How can I believe you?" Cocotte nodded towards Leon, saying calmly, "Isn't her existence proof enough?" Following Cocotte's gesture, Vinia's gaze fell on Leon. This time, she was completely stunned because she could not see any flow of natural energy in Leon's body. Though the divine tree was absorbing energy from all elves, and even Cocotte Yade could not avoid it, only resisting through her control over natural energy. But Leon was different. It was as if she completely rejected natural energy. If she couldn't produce natural energy herself, she naturally couldn't be absorbed by the divine tree. So, Leon, who couldn't manipulate natural energy, to the divine tree, she is defective. At this moment, Vinia finally understood. Why was there an elf without a surname? Because this elf, unable to manipulate natural energy, could not provide natural energy for the divine tree to harvest. Therefore, to the divine tree, Leon was an elf with absolutely no value. No value meant the divine tree had no need to bestow her a surname. She understood now. Vinia understood everything. Unable to accept this reality, she clutched her head, overwhelmed by unbearable pain. This was a pain that came from deep within her soul. This was a reality no elf could accept. From the beginning, the elves had always believed the Yade divine tree protected them constantly, like a benevolent mother who had given them life. But when their most revered mother swung the scythe of ruthlessness and cruelty to harvest their lives, they couldn't even rise up in resistance like Cocotte. Indeed, under the divine tree's protection, the elves had forgotten about crisis awareness. The divine tree would never harm them, so the elves didn't need to be particularly strong, and they didn't even need to possess free will. The divine tree gave each elf a surname, planning out their entire lives in meticulous detail. The elves' entire lives were meant to be exploited by the divine tree. At this moment, Vinia desperately wished she wasn't so clear-headed and intelligent. She even wished she could be one of those ignorant masses. That way, she wouldn't have to accept reality so quickly. Perhaps the pain would be less intense too. Vinia slowly raised her head, her gaze filled with an intense desire for knowledge. There was one final question that needed to be answered in her heart. Then, if we were all created by the divine tree, without the divine tree, how would the elves continue to exist? Even though they now understood the dangers of the divine tree. But without it, if the elves no longer relied on the divine tree, then how would elves continue to be created? Cocotte put her hands on her hips and sighed helplessly. Ah, Vinia, I thought you were clever. You and all the other elves have always misunderstood one thing. She looked up at Vinia, then at the other equally confused elves, her gaze crystal clear. The divine tree is the divine tree, nature is nature. Nature includes the divine tree, but how dare the divine tree claim to be nature itself? At this moment, like thunder striking in her mind, Vinia gained a new understanding. Elves were born of nature. The divine tree had never been nature itself. In the outside world, elves had always been known as nature's beloved children. Where did this reputation come from? It certainly wasn't from humans entering the elven forest and seeing those captive elves. Whenever someone harmed an elf, nature would bring punishment upon the perpetrator. The divine tree, confined to the elven forest, could not punish those who harmed elves. What had been protecting the elves all along wasn't the divine tree, but rather the spirit of nature. Suddenly, the ground began to shake more violently, and dark clouds gathered in the sky. But in the next moment, they were torn apart by the red-wheeled sun, which cast its scorching light upon everyone below. Vinia suddenly realized something and looked up at the divine tree, seeing thick natural energy flowing towards it. She looked down, feeling her body becoming ethereal as the energy within gradually drained away. She could hardly believe it, but following that thick energy, she saw her kindred becoming ethereal like herself, their faces growing increasingly pale. Unlike her, their eyes were empty and lifeless. Before long, those weak ignorant masses would likely become nutrients for the divine tree before she did. No, Vinia looked at her kindred, her eyes brimming with tears, her expression full of reluctance. My kindred, don't disappear. No, I told you not to worry. Instantly, the natural energy within Cocotte surged forth. Thick branches and vines burst from the ground below. Carrying dense natural energy, they surrounded the elves, continuously providing them with natural energy. Under this rich natural energy, their bodies were maintained. Vinia snapped back to her senses in amazement, looking at Cocotte in disbelief. She could feel that Cocotte was consuming her own natural energy to maintain the lives of their kindred. Cocotte, just a bit of energy, it's nothing. Cocotte raised her hand, pinching her thumb and index finger together to show a tiny gap. For me, it's only consuming this much. Cocotte had been away from the divine tree for so many years, no longer needing to offer any natural energy to it. Therefore, the natural energy she had accumulated had reached a terrifyingly large amount. Even if she were absorbed by the divine tree for an entire day, she wouldn't be in any danger. Moreover, Cocotte crossed her arms, saying with a confident smile, before I resigned, I was still your queen. Isn't it only natural for a queen to protect her subjects? As soon as these words fell, Vinia's heart suddenly jolted. Oh, how strange. Her heart began to beat uncontrollably. Holding her breath, she could even feel her entire body trembling with each heartbeat. It was as if a very special emotion was sprouting and growing from within her heart, making her unconsciously want to worship the elf before her. At this moment, in Vinia's eyes, Cocotte's figure became incredibly tall and magnificent, dazzling and brilliant, like a shining star. She looked at Cocotte, her lips trembling as she spoke, but as long as the divine tree doesn't stop, even your energy will. Before she could finish, a violent pillar of fire began to spread from the center of the divine tree to its surroundings. The entire surface of the divine tree was no longer covered in magma-like patterns, but was truly burning. The sturdy barks began to gradually crack and collapse into chunks of charcoal, contracting towards the center. Flames burst forth from the giant tree's center, climbing straight up towards the crown, like an awakened fire serpent opening its massive jaws, completely swallowing the entire giant tree. The fire serpent broke through the cloud layer, coiling for hundreds of miles, completely engulfing the towering, flourishing crown that reached into the clouds. The entire sky seemed to be ignited by flames, attempting to completely burn away the black sky. Branches turned to charcoal fell towards the ground, reigniting in the hot air currents, until they turned to ash, completely dispersing in midair. Among the violent flames, there were even the angry roars of a giant beast, making the world seem incredibly fragile in these terrible howls. Flame-severing hatred. Cocotte looked up, feeling this familiar power, filled with emotion. "See, now you really don't need to worry." Vinia was suddenly stunned. She watched the massive divine tree completely wrapped in violent flames, the dancing fire reflected in her eyes, as if through some strange connection, like the grumbling divine tree breaking apart. The elves felt the same sensation. Now, their bodies were no longer ethereal, and they looked down at their solid bodies in confusion. They still hadn't realized what had happened. But in the next second, within that crazy dancing storm of flames, the giant beast flowing with magma broke through the divine tree's fragile shell, swallowed the flames on the tree's surface, and slowly stepped out. Upon seeing the giant beast, countless elves felt immense shock in their hearts, giving them an urge to kneel. Even Vinia felt the same, her body moving to kneel along with her kindred involuntarily. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept in from all directions, supporting the knees of the elves who were about to kneel. They were completely stunned, and couldn't help but look up towards the source in the sky. Vinia did the same. She saw clearly. Standing on the magma-covered giant beast was a man wearing a black windbreaker. His windbreaker was covered in red patterns that surged in the wild wind. His cold gaze surveyed all the elves present. "The Yade divine tree forced you to kneel in the name and authority of nature." In the quiet world, only the sound of burning flames remained. And the man's irresistible voice rang out calmly. "Now, Kravina commands you to stand." The elves gazed skyward. Victor stood atop Gul'dan's massive frame, bathed in golden sunlight. Even Vinia stared at Victor in amazement, the giant crimson figure reflected in her eyes. A human? No, Victor didn't feel human to her at all. Vinia studied Victor intently, seemingly able to sense an extremely scorching temperature emanating from his aura. This human before her possessed natural energy even purer than that of a calamity. Indeed, the purest natural energy. Natural energy itself had different levels of purity. In this world, there existed 6 natural elements. From any element, natural energy could be extracted. The calamities originated from nature. They were the purest physical manifestations of the 6 elements in this world. Correspondingly, the energy contained within them had reached an absolute singular purity. For example, the fire calamity Gul'dan possessed only the fire element, with no possibility of mixing with other attributes. The same applied to other calamities. The reason they were called calamities was precisely because of this absolute pure energy manifestation. It could no longer be used as normal energy. This terrifyingly pure power would trigger uncontrollable natural disasters wherever it appeared in the world. Everywhere it went, living beings perished, and all things wailed in agony. No creature could survive under the absolute purity of a single type of energy. At this moment, the current elven forest perfectly embodied the word calamity in its fullest sense. Vinia looked toward Gul'dan's rear at the exploding and burning Yade divine tree, which continuously released terrifying heat waves. The surrounding hundreds of miles were completely covered in fierce flames and merciless lava, occasionally bursting up from the ground. The sky seemed to be ignited by this terrible heat wave and flames, with endless crimson suspended above the entire elven forest. Looking at this horrifying scene before her, Vinia finally understood why only they could be called calamities. Kravina, Vinia murmured. She remembered Cocotte mentioning this surname. Now, the bearer of this name had appeared before all the elves in an absolutely shocking manner. He stood high atop the calamity's head, his body entwined with red patterns, his feet covered in flowing magma, with flames constantly burning from the hem of his clothes. Like Lord of Calamity. Vinia turned to look at her elven kin. They too looked up at the enormous Gulden, feeling the scorching temperature stinging their cheeks, their eyes completely hollow. Their voices became weak as if scattered by the high temperature. The divine tree. Destroyed? The Yay divine tree. It's dead? All the elves trembled, their lips quivering, completely disbelieving. They couldn't accept it. In their hearts, the Yay divine tree was like their mother. In the elves' eyes, they didn't care whether they were being exploited by the divine tree or not. They had long grown accustomed to having the divine tree's presence. No matter what, at least the divine tree had indeed given them lasting peace of mind, even though the divine tree hadn't actually done anything. And finally, the divine tree died. It died in the midst of an even purer form of nature. Just as Vinia had said, they were ignorant masses, and the ignorant masses only lived in their own world. The divine tree continued to crackle and burn under the intense fire, its wooden surface completely collapsed, its fragile core long since torn apart by the flames that raged like a savage beast. Large patches of ash fell toward the ground, while branches and leaves transformed into crimson starlight were completely cast into the red stars above. Withered ashes scattered in the air, mercilessly reopening those wounds in the elves' hearts once again. The elves fell into prolonged grief, their hands tightly clasped together, brows furrowed in agony, their minds bound as if by a noose that completely restricted their rationality. Intense mental anguish spread throughout their bodies, sorrowful cries gradually spreading through the crowd. The low moans of sadness transformed into rivers of blue crystal tears, flowing silently amidst the flames. A fine rain fell, seemingly representing the elves' sorrow, violently striking the dancing flames. Hazy and deep steam immediately burst forth, completely obscuring the treetops. Vinia also lowered her head, not daring to look directly at Cocotte. "Please forgive their ignorance, Your Majesty." They were ignorant masses, but their feelings were genuine. Cocotte also watched these elves, heterochromatic light flowing slowly in her eyes. "Victor, perhaps we could use a gentler way to help these elves accept reality." Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, walking down from atop Gulden's head. Two streams of magma beneath his feet seemed to form steps, hovering in the air. Until his feet touched the ground, they transformed into flames and gradually dispersed. Victor calmly looked at the crying elves. "This wasn't actually the outcome I had in mind. But if I had to do it again, I would make the same decision." The divine tree had been completely burned by the flames, its massive body entirely shattered. Only a huge, emerald heart spiraled up into the sky. At the sight of the heart, the elves even forgot to cry. Their gazes followed the heart up to the sky. Victor looked at the glowing green heart and said quietly, "You know what, Cocotte?" Cocotte turned her head in confusion. "Even without me, you could have accomplished all this." In the game's future storyline, Cocotte had returned to the Elven Forest. The first thing she did was liberate the elves' imprisoned minds, rescuing them from the Yay Divine Tree's control. Yes, this was a rescue. The Yay Divine Tree was never anything sacred. Ridiculously, the elves believed they were born from the Divine Tree. However, in reality, the Divine Tree was merely a tool for reproduction. What truly gave birth to them was natural energy. This was why after the Elven Queen left the Divine Tree, it could no longer create elves. Because the Divine Tree couldn't produce natural energy on its own to create elves. However, this mere tool, through its long contact with natural energy, gradually developed its own consciousness. It wanted to usurp nature's beloved children. Thus, it had controlled the elven race, nature's favored children, for thousands of years. In the future, Cocotte would understand this and issue a quest that only players could accept. Players who completed it would receive the achievement, Liberator of the Elves. So Victor had merely accelerated this process. And because he knew what would happen after the Divine Tree's death, he was unrestrained in destroying it. Get ready to experience nature's gift. Feel the culmination of thousands of years of elven accumulation. As his words fell, that heart floating in the sky, as if receiving some command, burst forth with several fissures. White light spread forth from within. The heart struggled in the air, beat a few final times, and completely shattered. Instantly, Infinite natural energy accompanied by bright and terrifying white light broke through the clouds, penetrated the crimson sky, completely rejecting the flames and high temperature. The white light penetrated deeper than the sky, completely piercing through the heavy clouds, creating a huge hole, allowing daylight to pour straight down. The sun, which had been covered by the red wheel, gradually revealed its original golden appearance. The drizzling rain, penetrated by white light, began to grow more intense. Torrential rain crashed into the loose soil. Lightning frantically flickered in the compressed cloud layer, storms instantly mixing with the downpour. Green shoots slowly emerged from the soil that had been wetted by the heavy rain and bathed in light. The entire earth seemed to be completely upturned, rich and black soil exposed to the air, enjoying nature's shower. Lustrous green covered all the soil, growing rapidly. At this moment, all the elves watching this scene completely forgot to cry. They all raised their heads, feeling this pure and extremely concentrated natural energy pouring down generously across the entire elven forest. This natural energy suddenly burst forth, transforming into streams of light, like tens of thousands of meteors, merging into each elf's body. This natural energy was what the elves had constantly offered to the Yade Divine Tree. But now, with the Divine Tree's demise, all this unreleased energy was returned to the elves. They watched as the white natural energy completely merged with their bodies, a full and warm energy permeating their limbs. Their muscles seemed to become firmer and stronger, their hearing more acute, their perception of the world seemingly becoming clearer and purer. This is? Cocotte was also amazed as she felt this return of natural energy, experiencing incredible shock. A long-lost sense of comfort arose throughout her body and mind. If it could continue a while longer, she might. Victor said calmly, "This is the energy you elves have offered to the Yade Divine Tree over thousands of years. Upon its death, it has returned these to you. Similarly, it also returned to those elves who died peacefully on this ancestral land, never to see daylight again." That energy with nowhere to go transformed into nature's tribute. With the Divine Tree's death, all things could live. The elves gradually forgot their sorrow, focusing on the warm power entering their bodies. They couldn't understand, but they witnessed it firsthand, experienced it personally. Why did things develop in a better direction after the Divine Tree's death? At this point, Cocotte turned back to look at Victor. "Victor, there's still one problem unsolved. That is, the Yade Divine Tree's final influence." Why did the elves revere the Yade Divine Tree? Naturally, it was because in their eyes, only the Divine Tree could create elves. So for thousands of years, the elves naively believed that elven reproduction depended on the Divine Tree. This was also why they felt such sorrow after its death. But the elves dared not rebel. They could only maintain their sorrow because, in a sense, the one who killed the Divine Tree was their father figure. Victor showed no concern, merely saying quietly, "Remember that well of water in your elven territory?" "Well water?" Cocotte pondered puzzledly for a moment, suddenly realizing what Victor meant by that well water. Could it be the moon's holy spring? Vinia, standing nearby, heard this name and became somewhat angry, saying to Victor, "That's not a well. It's a spring." "A spring." Victor paid no attention to Vinia's correction, simply saying calmly, "Let's go." "Take me there." After passing through a dense forest, Victor found himself before a dark rocky terrain. While the surroundings were pitch black, behind the layers of rocks lay a pool of phosphorescent blue water. Countless fireflies, seemingly oblivious to day and night, flickered with green light. "We're here." "This is the moon's holy spring," Vinia announced. Victor calmly gazed at the scene before him. The lake's surface was perfectly still, remaining mirror-like even as the breeze rustled the surrounding wild grass. Blue phosphorescence glowed from the lake's depths, like wandering souls endlessly drifting. Silver-white waterfalls crashed into the pool in great sheets, yet the two ends of the lake were like different worlds, one absolutely serene, the other constantly churned by the waterfall's force. In the pitch-black sky hung what appeared to be a silver crescent moon with a faint yellow glow, its single beam of moonlight falling silently into the lake. This moon seemed permanently fixed in the sky. This land existed in eternal night, never seeing daylight. Seeing this, Vinia explained, The moon's holy spring constantly absorbs lunar essence to maintain its pure energy. Every day, designated elves collect water from the spring to water the divine tree, allowing it to create new elves. However, at this point, Vinia glanced at Cocotte sitting on her cloud. With the queen absent, no matter how much spring water is used, the divine tree can no longer produce new elves. Cocotte turned her face away guiltily, avoiding Vinia's gaze. Still, she declared righteously, "You saw earlier, the divine tree is no good thing. If I had stayed there, I probably would have been drained dry." But Victor's next words stunned them both. "No, the divine tree is a good thing." Hearing this, Cocotte and Vinia froze in bewilderment. Victor continued unhurriedly, "I'm not talking about the Jade divine tree, but rather, the divine tree itself. From a tool's perspective, the divine tree's existence was quite necessary. It could collect the elves' natural energy and, when watered by the moon's holy spring, transform that natural energy into new elves. Otherwise, trying to grow an elf naturally would be nearly impossible. So the nature spirit created two tools in nature to allow the elven race to reproduce freely. One was the divine tree, and the other was the moon's holy spring. But as a tool, the divine tree's fatal mistake was developing its own consciousness. It gave itself a name, Jade. The name itself wasn't important. What mattered was that with this name came consciousness. It became dissatisfied with its status, unwilling to merely serve as a production tool, so it forcibly bound the elves. It changed the natural way where all elves could reproduce using natural energy, making it so only the Elven Queen could create new elves. It wanted to carefully select over thousands of years, always choosing the strongest elf, using her talents as a blueprint to create all elves, to generate pure natural energy for itself. It had almost succeeded. It had even completed its thought control over the elven race. But unfortunately, such grand plans often fail midway, because Victor had arrived. Apart from some special reproduction methods, elves using the divine tree to reproduce is the most common way. In the future, Cocotte would help players kill the Jade divine tree and use natural energy to reshape a new divine tree. And a divine tree without self-awareness would be purely a production tool. Which meant, as long as elves desire it, they don't actually need an Elven Queen to reproduce. The Elven Queen was merely a forced creation of the Jade divine tree, just to make its actions seem more reasonable. These words left Vinia completely stunned. "You mean?" Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, taking in Vinia's shock. "That's right. Even you can do it. Use your own natural energy to create new elves. As long as nature existed, elves would not go extinct." The elves' worry about Cocotte's absence leading to their extinction had nothing to do with Cocotte herself. It was all because of the Jade divine tree. Because the Jade divine tree had forcibly bound the Elven Queen, making elves believe only she could give birth to new elves. Over thousands of years, the elves' thinking had become completely fixed. At this moment, Victor lowered his head, looking at his status panel. Viga's power had recovered nearly half. That should be enough. As his words fell, a green stripe climbed up Victor's windbreaker. In that instant, Vinia's body began to tremble violently. Once again, she sensed a calamity's power from Victor. But this power was completely different from Gul'dan's. Was it? She looked at Victor in disbelief. If Victor hadn't forbidden kneeling, she would have already fallen to her knees before this man. At that moment, a pure energy radiated a green light. As if drawn and infused by this power, the moon's holy spring slowly rose. The blue lake water floated up towards the sky, forming a phosphorescent silver stream that flew through the forest and into the heavens. Watching this scene, Vinia was both shocked and intensely curious. What was he trying to do? Seeing this, Cocotte's eyes lit up, as if she had already guessed. Victor stood with his hands in his pockets and said calmly, "We can go back now. What happens next will change your elven race's 1,000-year-old fixed mindset." Leon sat on a huge burnt tree root. She had stayed behind to watch over these elves. If they tried to do anything extreme, Leon could take out the weapon Leah had given her to intimidate these poor elves. Meanwhile, she also had to look after Victor's strange one-eyed crow. One hand rested on her leg, stroking the feathers of the crow sprawled across her thigh. Viga lay limp on Leon's leg, motionless except for the slight rise and fall of its tiny body as it breathed. Leon raised her head, looking at the sky. The natural disaster caused by that beast that could only be called a calamity had finally stopped. But that natural energy continued to flow endlessly across this continent. The elves were caught between joy and sorrow, some delighted, others grieving. They were still immersed in the return of natural energy. Among them, only one elf stood apart from the rest. That was Leon. She felt absolutely nothing about the divine tree's death. Even after the divine tree's death, when natural energy burst forth, none of it was meant for her. She could neither create nor absorb natural energy. She could only sit quietly, watching the remaining elves express their various emotions of joy and sorrow. Her heart was as still as the moon's holy spring, like dead water. Her former hatred towards the elves seemed to have dissipated. She had come to understand, these elves had no independent thoughts. They simply blindly and fanatically worshipped the divine tree. Under the divine tree's influence, they naturally rejected her as an outsider without a family name. But it didn't matter anymore. Apart from sharing elven features with them, Leon had never really considered herself a true elf. More importantly, she had another identity. She was Leah's subordinate, a retainer of the Cravina family. Now, her surname was Cravina. At this moment, the crow on her leg rolled over. That was quite insane. This is the first time I've experienced being completely drained like this. Leon suddenly froze, looking down as if she had seen something incredibly shocking. Her emerald pupils trembled as she stared intently at the crow on her leg. The crow spoke. The crow slowly stood up from her leg, pecking at its feathers before raising its head to fix its single eye on Leon. Meeting her gaze, "Young lady, you look curious." Vega suddenly broke into a mischievous smile, giggling. "An elf who cannot channel natural energy. I've been interested in you for a while." Leon sat stunned, but her expression remained serious. "What exactly are you? Want to know the reason behind your condition?" The crow's seductive voice gradually rose in Leon's ears. Sitting on the tree root, hearing its words, even her breathing became somewhat rapid. "Could it be, you know why I shh?" Vega looked at Leon with a smile, saying casually, "If you want to know more, we'll talk later. For now, let's watch a good show." As if to verify the crow's words, a silver-white spring water accompanied by green energy came spiraling down from the sky. It passed through the quiet yet restless air, tracing an extremely mysterious arc in the sky. Like a graceful dragon, it gradually descended. The elves watched in shock and confusion as the silver spring water appeared from thin air. The moon's holy spring? How is this possible? How can the moon's holy spring appear here out of nowhere? The holy water circled above their heads, gradually falling towards the burnt ground, watering the deep soil. Soon, a green sprout pushed through the soil again, stretching its fragile yet vibrant body. Before the shocked eyes of countless elves, the sprout grew rapidly. Numerous thick vines suddenly shot up from the ground, completely engulfing that tender green and lifting it high into the clouds. As the green shoot was lifted, it transformed into a tall tree crown. It extended hard wooden branches that slowly merged with the vines below. The elves were completely dumbfounded. The divine tree has been resurrected? Leon also stood frozen in place. But unlike the other elves' shock, the moment the giant tree grew, a black magic array invisible to the naked eye was constructed from the ground, rising up and attaching itself to the divine tree. Leon noticed all of this as if it was deliberately letting her notice. She looked down at the black crow. Similarly, a flash of darkness passed through the crow's single eye. That ghostly voice rose again in her ear. "Did you see it? He. An extremely sinister laugh echoed in her ears. In that moment, a sharp pupil flashed through Leon's mind, as if it had completely peered into her very soul, leaving only a voice gradually echoing in the depths of her heart. "Keep this secret for me." This story is about to welcome a completely new ending. The divine tree once again pierced through the deep, dark clouds. Its branches extended frantically above the clouds, with tender green shoots emerging and unfurling their verdant leaf cores. The massive trunk, bronze in color, was interwoven with complex and sturdy branches. Under the golden light, it sparkled with brilliant radiance like hope itself. The elves stood frozen in place. Shock and surprise spread through the crowd like a plague. Their eyes widened, lips parted in astonishment. For a moment, they didn't know whether to rejoice or kneel in worship at the tree's return. In their eyes, the reborn divine tree no longer held that familiar maternal warmth. Though the divine tree had been restored, the elves felt it hadn't truly come back to life, as if it lacked vitality. Even its surface green and bronze coloring seemed artificial. At that moment, a stream of lava melted through space, revealing an enormous red tunnel. Terrifying heat instantly swept across the entire forest. Countless elven gazes were drawn to it. Through that scorching tunnel walked a man in a coat. Cocotte followed behind Victor, floating gently on a cloud. Behind them both was Vinia, her eyes darting about as she bit her lip, her facial muscles twitching slightly. What she had just passed through, could it really be called a portal? Though she hadn't felt any burning heat within it, she was still shaken. Vinia looked back at the lava-flowing tunnel. The magma slowly dripped onto the ground, colliding with the dew on the grass. Small puffs of white mist exploded upward as the lava solidified, forming black stones exposed on the grass, leading directly to the base of the divine tree. The elves stared at the black stone path, not daring to breathe. They feared even one piece of lava might crack. Victor looked at Vinia and said calmly, "Now, do as you did before. Offer your natural energy to the divine tree." Hearing Victor's command, Vinia composed herself, placing one hand firmly against her chest. She carefully walked across the black stone path and stood before the divine tree. She slowly placed her hand on the divine tree, and the bronze trunk gradually began to twist. Green natural energy flowed from her palm, following the tree's patterns. That green light quickly passed through the entire bronze trunk, beginning to spread throughout the divine tree. Those illuminated patterns gradually moved toward the crown, passing through the cloud layer, rapidly gathering at the central branches at the very top. Under the enhancement of natural energy, tender shoots grew rapidly. A transparent, crystalline fruit seemed to be held up at the crown's peak, slowly absorbing the green energy at the trunk's summit. The divine tree began to shake violently, and an intense light suddenly burst forth, illuminating the entire lush forest. The elves covered their eyes, watching through their fingers as powerful energy waves rippled outward, causing new shoots around them to grow again. This was energy full of vitality, and this light was like hope itself. Who knew how many years had passed since Cocotte left? They had never seen the divine tree release such dazzling light. Finally, the green fruit at the top gathered enough energy and slowly split open. Intense light spots accompanied by what seemed like spring water fell from the sky, and a familiar essence instantly spread throughout the entire elven population. Vinia's face showed shock, but it quickly turned to surprise. Under the watchful eyes of all elves, the first elf was born. The branches at the top of the divine tree began to open and close, and an elf emerged from the dense crown. Her body was covered by emerald leaves, revealing large patches of lotus root white skin. Her pink cherry-like lips opened and closed, breathing steady and even. And those characteristic pointed ears. For the elves, this miracle-like event had occurred. The elves were stunned, countless curious yet doubtful gazes examining the newborn elf up and down, their eyes full of familiarity. Even Vinia couldn't control her expression, her mouth agape. Because this elf, strictly speaking, was born from her? Oh no, had she become the queen? Cocotte, seeing this scene, was extremely satisfied, nodding vigorously on the side. Now, she wouldn't have to continue being the elven queen. Vinia carefully stepped forward, tentatively standing before the newborn elf. She could feel that the natural energy in this elf was from the same source as her own. Because this elf was born from the natural energy she had offered. Vinia's body trembled slightly as she shakily reached out her hand. "Child, what is your surname?" According to procedure, newborn elves would be given surnames by the divine tree. After learning the surname, the high priestess would give them a name and assign them a profession corresponding to their surname. Though Vinia hadn't done this for a very long time, not since Cocotte left. In the decades after Cocotte's departure, no new elves had appeared, and she was the first completely new elf in these decades. The newborn elf looked at Vinia with confusion. Seeing Vinia reach out her hand, She promptly grabbed Vinia's arm and pressed against her body. Her face showed an expression of great enjoyment and comfort. Vinia's heart trembled, her entire body frozen in place. But the elf continued to snuggle against her arm, the warm sensation reaching her heart. Since Vinia's birth, she had been responsible for receiving other newborn elves. She had never seen an elf so attached to her. Elves indeed came from the same source and were very close to each other. But she had never seen one this close, already completely pressed against her body. Clearly, you don't understand the concept of family. At some point, Victor had quietly walked behind Vinia, hands in his pockets, his tone even. Vinia suddenly turned her head. Far family? Yes. Elves didn't understand what family meant. In the elven social system, all elves were born through the queen's energy. Elven society was more like a simple collective. Each had the queen's bloodline, each could be called family. Strictly speaking, because the elven queen always had to wait quietly in the divine tree. This meant that elves, from birth, never saw what their mother who gave birth to them looked like. As a result, they would mistakenly consider the divine tree as the mother who gave birth to them. They would transfer that sense of closeness to the divine tree. They would begin to worship the divine tree like other elves, constantly praying to the elven queen, hoping she would create more elves. Without the concept of mother, elves naturally wouldn't call each other family, because they only had one common mother, the divine tree. And now, with the appearance of this newborn elf, the situation would change. Each elf's birth would be attended by their own producer, and the same natural energy was like blood ties for elves. Therefore, newborn elves would develop absolute attachment to their producer. Congratulations, now you are her mother. As Victor's words fell, Vinia stood frozen, turning back like a fool to look at this newborn elf who was holding her arm and completely unwilling to separate from her. Vinia's mind went blank, both eyes becoming completely dazed. Her mouth opened wide, letting out an uncontrollable exclamation. But Victor didn't care about her shock and continued, also, you should name her now. Vinia stood dumbfounded, but she doesn't have a surname yet. Her surname depends on what yours is. Hearing this, Vinia became even more stunned, her pupils slightly dilating, her expression becoming somewhat unaccepting. Because her surname was unique. Wait a minute. She seemed to realize something and continued listening to Victor. I told you, don't use your old common sense to view your new world now. The divine tree is dead. You, and the other elves. Your surnames no longer have any restrictions, they will only become your titles, and give meaning to the existence of family. That's all. Vinia stood frozen, listening to Victor's explanation, then turned her head dumbly. So, she has the same surname as me. Jektla. She looked at the adorable elf before her whose eyes were full of herself, her own eyes full of expectation, her heart filled with a strong and inexplicable impulse. When she realized this child shared her surname, suddenly, Vinia had an urge to protect her. She unconsciously reached out her hand, stroking the top of this elf's head, and this newly born elf greatly enjoyed it, nuzzling against Vinia's palm. From now on, you'll be called Melina, that's it. For the first time, Vinia felt something different about the act of bestowing a name. No longer using work as an excuse, but truly wanting to give an elf a real name, a name full of soul and love. At this moment, Vinia was filled with joy. Other elves also remained silent, saying nothing, as if silently celebrating the arrival of this newborn elf, letting this long silent elven forest once again be filled with vitality. Leon also raised her head, looking at this extremely happy scene before her, her eyes showing some envy. If when she was born back then, it had been such a scene, would her experiences have been different? What was she thinking? At that time, Victor hadn't even been born yet. She quietly lowered her head, not wanting those elves to see her expression. But then a sharp voice came to her ears again. What's wrong, feeling envious?